Deicide and its consequences. Summary. The curtains part on Earthsea 5 years after the return of its gods. Behind them, to the audience's dismay, lies the dead body of someone who is supposed to be immortal, and you have no idea what that means. Jane Crocker is gone, and all the smiles suddenly look a whole lot faker. Gears stuck in place for far too long begin to turn again, as politics, love, and unresolved trauma swirl together in the dark puddles for which Inspector Pyrope trudges. You know what they say, it takes a village to kill a god. Act 1. Chapter 1. The day on which eternity ended. Viewpoint. Dave. A Damoclean sword dangles over Earthsea, looking for a victim, looking for a linchpin, a release valve for all the unsightly turmoil simmering and swirling and bubbling in the restless minds of its unsuspecting inhabitants, bubbling in yours, preventing you from sleeping. You imagine the blade right above your head, massive and keen, leaving shallow cuts across your brow as it passes by. That way, at least, you don't have to imagine it above his while he snores peacefully beside you. Behind closed eyes you trace the sword's path. Tick-tock. Rhythmically back and forth like a clock's pendulum, perfectly synced to your breath. Why is it always clocks? Karkat says it's just your hypervigilance, this feeling that any minute now, any second, any instant, everything is gonna explode around you, and that you'd better thought of a direction to dodge in well in advance, if you don't want to sustain a nasty scar or worse. Ready your muscles, keep your hand near your weapon. Just like in your bro's apartment, always simultaneously lifetimes ago and exactly like yesterday. Tick-tock. Back, forth. A blade swinging, a countdown unceasingly decrementing. You know the feeling of that friction, of that build-up exactly like yesterday, of that anxious quiet which isn't really peace but no more than the preamble to an imminent storm, of a flurry of shuriken out of some dark corner you hadn't scouted carefully enough, of a plushy assault from above, or the sudden steel of a katana at your throat. Any and all, whenever you aren't looking. You know it. You know the feeling of impending danger so well that you can't pretend not to notice it, can't ignore the incessant nerve pulses digging your fingers deeper and deeper into the mattress with every minuscule sound from outside. The worst thing is that you can't even pretend like you don't know that Karkat is merely trying to convince himself when he says it's just your hypervigilance acting up. He knows the soft lull of a pillow which looks comfy right up until it's suddenly on your face, smothering you. And so he sees the sword as well. You know he sees it. But you can't address that fact without playing into his own anxieties, and Gigas! Where is Rose when you need her? Not that she'd actually be helpful. You tense your thigh a little, which has in some awfully Pavlovian way become an unspoken signal to the dog girls played out across both you and Karkat. Jade hugs around your leg without waking and begins to drool onto your calf. It's embarrassing. It's silly. You hope she never finds out about this, but you also immediately feel safer. Behind your eyelids, the sword passes on. Away from your hive, away from the troll kingdom, away from this beautiful little speck of actual safety you fought so hard to earn. Land anywhere. Please, anywhere. Just not here. Viewpoint. None. And the sword of Damocles really did move on, round and back and forth. Many of Earthsea's gods could feel its malignant presence, though perhaps not quite so acutely. They sensed that something was off, that the gears weren't quite interlinking correctly, that the unaddressed friction just kept building, and that any day now, any minute, any instant, it would all explode around them. They were wrong, of course. When the blade came down upon its chosen head, well outside the Troll Kingdom's borders 4 hours later, the resultant sound was not a bang, but a thud. Jane Crocker, CEO philanthropist, cake aficionado, and conditionally immortal deity of this world, was found dead by her fiancé beneath the foyer's internal balcony on the following morning. And so, naturally, quiet turned to storm. The day on which eternity ended smelled like crisp magnolia in the cool morning fog. It was pleasant, serene even, and yet that same temporal interval housed classrooms full of sobbing, incredulous school children learning how to spell the word Deicide. Few had the requisite interest in old Earth history to know what a 9/11 was, though it would undoubtedly have been a useful cultural reference point. Deicide had said so during the press conference. Then again, maybe the defining feature of a 9/11 was an absence of cultural reference points, a paralyzing, insurmountable unprecedentedness. Deicide had also said something along those lines mere moments later, before being interrupted by his boyfriend. Either way, something precious, a perhaps naive but nonetheless foundational notion of stability, had irreparably cracked in many of these young minds. Surprisingly, the scenes looked very similar in the generally more progressive schools of the Troll Kingdom, where discussions of Jane Crocker used to have a somewhat derisive, or at the very least suspicious, tenor. The children there might never have guessed that they'd bawl their eyes out over her death, but only because they never really conceived of the scenario. In truth, personal affection was entirely immaterial to the president's horror. You didn't need to like the god who passes to be dismayed by the simple realization that gods can be killed. You don't want the god of bad harvests, the god of chatty neighbors, or even the god of unexpected migraines to die, because that fundamental sense of security will inevitably vanish down the drain right along with them. If gods can be killed, then nothing is certain, nothing is safe. If Jane Crocker could die, then so could Jade Harley. Uncertainty swirled about its many crucibles, digging itself into newly formed cracks, and lending an oddly sinister quality to the otherwise serene morning fog. Viewpoint, Rose. Of yet, we have a hopelessly inchoate picture with regards to yesterday's events, but rest assured that the incident will be exhaustively investigated by all means at her disposal, for Jane's sake, that of her family, and of her friends. In this dismal moment, however, I fear that we are privy to no particulars which you do not already possess, and to no insights which you may relay. All we have is grief and questions. These were the words you had found for the cameras. You'd been poised and calm, but not to the point of appearing aloof, at least not by your standards. The 10 of you managed to present an astoundingly united front during that conference, a front which was almost certainly insincere to some degree, a literal front, but the whole affair couldn't help but elicit a feeling that there was still more connecting your disparate group than anyone had realized. The others must also understand that the killer is unlikely to be an outsider, and yet no accusations were made or even implied. No fingers were pointed, no tribes crystallized. It was an ordeal of tears and helpless hand gestures, of carefully worded statements and humanizing anecdotes. Still, the phrasing of her closing paragraph obfuscated a rather pressing detail. What concretely were these investigative means at your disposal that you so adamantly sought to exhaust? Thankfully, no one had posed that question yet, but it would only be a matter of time until they did. What about Flatfoot Dick? Like their personal protective shield, Callie envelops an almost catatonic Roxy on the opposite side of your little hemicycle. The concert detective from A Knack for Observation known for his heterodox methods and surly attitude. Surely that's just a character, an adorable escapement in the intricate clockwork of entirely fictitious mysteries. In any other context you would have taken this to be a joke, but their grave green eyes tell a different story. No one laughs. Dirk furrows his brow. No, Flatfoot's legit, by which I mean as legit as it gets when you're talking about essentially non-verbal crocodiles who try to eat your garbage when you aren't looking. Little guy's great for confidentiality, but I'm not gonna trust Jane to a reptile. Before it comes to that, I'll lead the investigation myself. And, like so many times throughout the morning, no one says the thing you're all thinking. No, you won't. Nobody here can do it because we are all suspects. Luckily, Jake steps in with a pitcher of freshly brewed tea just in time to prevent another uncomfortable silence. In his fuzzy, Nemrus green robe, the now sole occupant of this Art Deco palace looks a bit like a shell-shocked worm on a string to you, a feat considering his impressive stature. The man shuffles across polished marble, perilously unsteady, attempting not to drop anything despite his still visible shaking. By the point when Dave and Karkat get up to support him on either side, Jake had already cleared the foyer halfway, but the gesture seems nonetheless to be appreciated. For a moment, their uncertain gait comes to a standstill, as they silently decide whether to pass between the Hammercycle and the now-dead friend at its center, or to awkwardly take the long way around. Who knew what the rules of etiquette dictated for situations like this? You were figuring them out as you went. Dirk had come without his shades, and Dave had taken his off the moment he saw. Jade didn't wear any neon green accessories for the first time in years. After a second's hesitation, the mismatched trio settles on the latter option and hands out cups from behind before rejoining you on the floor. There have to be competent detectives on this planet who aren't consorts. Not that I have any issues with Flatfoot. Oh shit, really? And I'm sure half of those are board-certified experts at solving unexplainable crimes which have never happened on account of being impossible, diplomas for investigating god-slayings littering the prestigious walls of their cramped offices. We are absolutely not settling for competent. The folded steel texture of his words is only mildly undercut by the characteristic Striderite lack of eye contact. Jade instinctively freezes up. It was almost funny in a way. Had it been anyone else under any other set of circumstances, Jane would have been placed in charge of such a task without second thought. She was the great cake detective after all, author of a number of critically acclaimed murder mysteries, all of them lovingly adapted to screen by Dirk's production company. Yes, they tended to justly catch flack for their less than sensitive portrayals of troll culture, but even detractors had to grant a meticulous construction. The Crocker heiress had an indisputable genius about her when it came to puzzles and sleuthsmanship. She would have certainly been the one for the job if she weren't lying dead in front of you. Capax investigare nisi mortua.
Okay, my already strained think pan is going to explode if we circle this black hole of a conversational load gaper any longer.
Yo, Karkat.
Was I mercifully not invited to a secret pre-conference conference where it was unanimously settled that pretending to be brainless imbeciles choking on their own saliva was our best strategy?
Karkat, chill.
Or is there another, equally awful reason why no one is addressing the hideously obvious choice floating somewhere out in paradox space like a fucking piece of garbage looking for a melodramatic sociopath of a girlfriend? You know, the blind jackass-shaped trunk beast in the room.
John seemed startled by the proposal. You hadn't paid too much attention to him, what with how fervently he was trying to melt into the background, but now your eyes have met. Since you last saw him in person, Egbert has grown his hair out to about shoulder length, though you somehow doubt that this is a conscious decision as much as neglectful self-maintenance. He'd gotten better at responding to your messages over the past months, but in retrospect you suppose it was naive to extrapolate a general improvement of his mental health from just that. You sigh. From beside, Kanaya gives a knowing look of the you can't help people who don't want to be helped variety, as though any part of her actually believed that. The woman was a phenomenal liar when she didn't know she was lying, a thoroughly attractive trait. Even though he looks absolutely miserable in it, John wears a plain black suit, unlike at every single formal event you have ever seen him attend. It was always either his casual outfit or a silly joke attire like the ectobiology suit. In some ways, you would have preferred that. But he too is just following the strange new rules of etiquette you are discovering for an entirely unprecedented event.
Teresa's a lawyer, not a detective. Probably not even a real lawyer. Oh, of course. Legislators aren't real lawyers. Any more flagrant human racism you wish to enlighten us with, Egbert?
Unless there are still imperial courts floating idly in the Stygian depths of paradox space, she is not a real legislator either.
Yes, however will she manage without the extensive training in solving impossible cases which never happen that all of these vocations customarily have crammed down their feeble meat tunnels? You know, this real thing which actually occurs. So, once you're done stabbing me in the back, could you maybe bring yourself to step through the puddle of my gruesome metaphorical viscera and feast your obstinate gander bulbs on the central point that these are all crime things?
Crime things?
Yes, and in addition to being the perhaps only intelligent person we know, Terezi has investigated murders on the meteor.
I see. Need I remind you that her somewhat motivated examination of the evidence led to her being wrong about who had committed these murders?
She wasn't objective then. Is there any good reason why she wouldn't be now?
You can't tell to what degree Karkat is merely finding excuses to reunite with a friend, but you can't describe his proposal as entirely meritless either. Terezi is simultaneously not a suspect and moderately suited to the endeavor, though there would still be the issue of actually recalling her from her mission. The group exchanges glances.
I don't mean to hasten, but does anyone have a better idea?
Dirk grunts, but doesn't outright dismiss the notion like all those preceding it, and so your concurrence is as silent as it is unanimous. You tilt your head wordlessly in the direction of Roxy, and your wife gives an approving nod. She always closes her eyes when she does it. Back when you were still a lonely child, drowning yourself in the Sorai, you could have never expected that communication might one day be so effortless. But here you are. As you cautiously walk over, the cherub gives you a look of suspicion mixed with concern. A look which desperately repeats, "Don't hurt them, I won't let anything hurt them," in an endless loop. It is obvious that Callie too is on the verge of crumbling, stripped of isolation, only holding their composure because they have someone to protect. So you summon a reassuring smile to your lips and softly place a hand on their trembling shoulder. "Please, I just want to give them a hug." It's difficult to read the skull-like features of cherubs, but you feel like the expression relaxes slightly before lifting an arm. You silently mouth, "Thank you," as you crawl under it to join your ecto-sibling on their partner's enormous lap. Roxy doesn't say anything. They don't have to. The prosecution is called to the stand. Chapter 2. Human Corpse Party. Viewpoint: Jake. Wednesday passed. Then Friday. You don't recall what happened on Thursday, apart from the fact that there are cameras and that you eventually collapsed exhausted on a chaise, only to awaken to another indistinct morning. Somehow time is eating itself as it waits for Miss Pyrope to arrive, chewing so slowly that you keep losing track. Funerals today? You think it's today. There's an open coffin in the foyer which tends to suck you into its orbit whenever you pass by. Around and around, spiraling closer until you can catch yourself. Inside the pine overcoat, a lifeless fiancé, resting upon pale blue satin and covered in assorted flowers, every day a few more, as though she should drown beneath them. In front of the pine overcoat, an old friend, lying curled up on the marble with vacant eyes drained of tears. They're not here for your support, you know that. Your little group was never very good at talking about feelings. You, in particular, were always exceptionally proficient at not talking about them. In fact, at deflecting and postponing and avoiding. It's really no wonder that no one's attempting to lean on your shoulder. You've never given them any reason to believe that you wouldn't give way, and you can't even address that frightful state of affairs without making her death about you. Still, seeing Roxy like this is devastating. You feel rotten for not possessing the tools to say anything to them which wouldn't sound like a platitude, all despite the fact that you are going through the same thing. You're scaling the same mountain by different routes and you don't know how to talk about it. Inside your mind, shapes gather to form the picture that haunts all your recent dreams. A number of vast stone pillars standing in a circle upon a hill. All of them damaged and ancient, marked with deep grooves and cracks, so perilously unsteady and ruined by time that you can almost see them swaying with the wind. If only they fell towards the center, they would hold each other, steadying one another mutually with their own instability, but the dream never ends like that. The pillars fall away from the center, and your heart is torn to shreds by another morning. You catch yourself a little closer to the coffin again. Gravity. How did you become so isolated? Roxy has had more visitors than you in your own home over the past days. One of them is their partner, but the point still stands. Strider has not shown his unnecessarily angular face, and while Jade's visits are splendid as far as distractions go, you'd like to have more than one, lest you feel like a miserable hermit. Every time she tells you that you should carry more guns, no matter how many you are already carrying, another revolver, another blunderbuss. You've joked that she'll only trust your safety once firearms fully cover your body like armor, and for a moment there was an expression in her face which told you that she didn't find the proposal quite as silly as you would have liked her to. You've become painfully aware that you didn't have many people you frequently talked to aside from Jane. Amidst all the friendly strangers and 5-minute acquaintances you've collected on movie sets and expeditions, you somehow failed to notice the loneliness creeping in from all sides. Had Jane felt similarly? She was certainly also preoccupied enough with her work to neglect social contact from time to time, but No, you shouldn't be thinking about this. Not when she rests there so peacefully. None of the flowers show any sign of wilting, utterly pristine. They even started to look fresher once placed upon her body. You take a deep breath as you look at the clock before lying down next to your friend. Hey, Roxy, are you okay? You don't exactly look up to Dick, if you don't mind me saying so. Their eyes were open the entire time, but you can tell that they only now started perceiving you. In response rings out the hollowest and most incredulous "Lamau" that you ever heard, but since they hadn't spoken at all in a while, they'll take it for progress. The funeral starts in a while. We best primp now, lest because the others are necessary botherations. Slowly they nod, pressing their cheek into the cold stone. Jake, she's really dead, isn't she? Yes, I fear Janie's gone for good. You'll cry, then you'll get ready, then afterwards you'll probably cry again. Perhaps you should heed Jade's advice and look for a therapist once your eyes have dried enough to see clearly. Viewpoint: none. Two figures drifted about the endlessly recursive, disordered loops of paradox space that day. Or rather, they would have if that day were a remotely meaningful phrase on the outskirts of ontology. In actuality, they are, were, or would be, occupying a shared non-location in which they serendipitously received a message. This message, in turn, truly had been sent that day, in a spot where chronology was ever so slightly more sane, though admittedly not by much. Circumstantial simultaneity proved itself an odd puppet master as always, connecting seemingly unrelated events with fate-coloured string and dragging them across its dimensionless chessboard like deranged cheese critters in search of predictably unpredictable stratagems. Incomprehensible to most. As such, the non-moment in which this communication went through was arbitrary, but not random. One of the two apocalyptic tourists instinctively understood all of this. The other did not care enough to try. Neither of them was Terezi Pyrope, and neither of them was particularly shocked by this fact. What's it say? Something like a squeal rang out into the void, while an outward creeping grin revealed blunt tooth after blunt tooth between her lips. Quickly, the smile grew too wide for comfort. Hey, what's it say? You won't believe this. Highly doubt it, just tell me. We have been invited to a human corpse party. Wait, you're actually thinking about leaving your beloved metacosmic eschaton unattended? He could already tell that the answer was yes from her positively unhinged facial expression, but it was surprising enough to merit asking either way. Do you know what I like about this place? Heh, trick question. You're infatuated with every facet of this roaring, pointlessly oversized reality shredder. Yes, I am, but specifically I'm talking about the fact that I'm very confident we would still be here when we return. The end of everything isn't going to go anywhere. So you're saying we could have left to do something else at any point? No, I was watching universe being ripped to shreds. Oh, of course, but a silly human... It's a corpse party, Solix. We have to. Viewpoint: Carcat. Throughout the entire day, Dave and Jade had tried to force your hair into a respectable shape using increasingly esoteric products. Human custom was named as a pretense, but only a terminally oblivious wriggler would fail to see the perverse pleasure the two of them self-evidently got out of it. All to no avail, of course. You had told them that it was impossible to make troll hair occupy any shape it did not naturally form, but none of that stopped either of them from messaging more noxious gels into your scalp. Eventually, because time was running out, they simply plopped a baseball cap with some ridiculous inscription onto your head. That would have been fine. You would have borne the indignity of it like you have borne so many before. But then came Kanaya. Moments before entering the church, she had jumped out from God knows where, using the full extent of her drink of fastness, and flung the disgraceful bit of fabric off your head and into the trash can. With cold, single-minded purpose, the woman rummaged through her purse until she found some nondescript cream to wordlessly run through your mane. It worked. You do not know how it worked. You do not know where she got it. You do not know what it is. What you do know is that by all rights of man and nature, it should not exist. Dave almost failed to recognize you. You almost failed to recognize yourself. The only conclusion a sane person can draw from any of this is that the laws of reality simply do not apply anymore. Perhaps you would be more shaken by this revelation had the rest of your life not forced your incredulity sponge to expand to freakish proportion. One fine evening, your lobe stem will be crushed beneath its colossal weight. You will gently spasm your way towards oblivion, believing at long last that the universe is sensible, a frothing, hideous miracle. But not today.
And remember, don't say anything inappropriate.
Just don't say anything. Saying this with love, better not risk it.
Good point. Stay silent and you won't have to do any chores for a month.
Right, if I have to go through such excruciating lengths to pretend like I am not attending, why am I even here? I have barely ever talked to her. I have on multiple occasions publicly called the fucking hoofbeast manure she tried to pass through the house what it is, and let us put the facts on the table where we can all plainly see them. Even among people I can actually stand, I'd probably be the last guy anyone wants at their funeral. I wouldn't want me at my own funeral.
Yeah, sure, stay home. No, that's a great idea, Karkat. I definitely want you to be the prime suspect in a murder investigation.
Oh, of course. I forgot about the time my denizen granted me the ability to kill god tiers in exchange for relationship advice. Did I ever tell you that story? It is as irritating and mind-numbing as it is patently fictitious.
And that would be an amazing alibi if it didn't apply to everyone. Please, Kaka, do it for Roxy, Jack and Dirk.
You groan, which they take for acquiescence because it in all likelihood is, much as you loathe to admit that fact. Mechanically, your gaze cycles between staring at Dave, the pews, and Jade, while tender words are being spoken about a person you had never had a particularly positive thought about. If someone asked you, and they never did, Jane had violated the most basic rule of godhood, and not the one which forbids death. She directly interfered with their world. All the other idiots did it right. Live your little life somewhere, reap your well-earned spoils. Occasionally, when it really matters, you can play the god card a little, just a touch. But on the whole, this world should be left to its citizens. How would Jane have liked it if some deity had tried to take control of her universe? In all legends of every civilization, no matter how asinine, gods created the world, and then they left it mostly alone until some fancy struck them. No one really wants to live under the thumb of an immortal being, but somehow most of your friends didn't get that. Didn't get that they weren't regular folks but terrifying forces of nature now. This whole event is a farce. Oh no, death happens. Yes, death happens. Death is normal. Some of your best friends are dead and you're certainly not making a big deal out of it. But in a few short years, most of these kids have internalized the fact that they are excluded from that everyone. And still, despite being outsiders to the very accommodating set of everyone, they are somehow also just regular guys who can go into politics without it being fucked. It was ridiculous. Fucked and ridiculous. Death happens. You know that. You know that this is normal. You know that you and Kanaya will be put in needlessly ornate wood boxes one day, and that a bunch of immortals will cry over your useless cadavers. It will be sad and stupid, and you will bear the indignity of it like you have borne so many before, but still. You two have found comfort in the idea that Dave and Jade and John would be immune from normalcy, that they were safe, that you wouldn't have to worry about your friends dying ever again, and yet here you are. You don't even want to think about how many guns Jade is probably carrying under that dress. God, you hate human corpse. Hello, suspects. The door flies open as though it were hit by a mid-scale explosion. Where's the body? She looks fucking emaciated, but also not quite as bad as you had expected. When your imagination got the better of you, the mental image of Terezi was always a shadow of her former self, a skeletal spectre haunting paradox space, held together by nothing but misplaced willpower and a neurotic notion that she somehow had to do this. Seemed to be biological pre-programming for anyone whose blood ran richer than Jade, this strange narrativistic thinking where you had to play your oh-so-important role to the bitter end if you didn't want something to metaphysically break. Especially those two, tangling themselves into grand tragedy after grand tragedy while spectacularly failing to ever step outside of themselves enough to realize how mind-numbingly stupid they were being. By that standard, your old friend looks remarkably fine, almost healthy. Between the purpose with which she swings her cane and the menacing excitement of her grin, it's plain that the fire hasn't yet burned itself to embers, and yet you try to temper your hope. You know how the story goes. You know she'll go back to her search once this little distraction is settled. She will downplay it all, ignore every word of advice from your mouth, and then, eventually, she will die in that void. That's how the tragedy ends. A cursory glance at your movie collection is enough to gain bone-deep awareness of exactly where those types of relationships lead. And the casket, literally where else would it be? She was murdered in a human corpse receptacle then. Whoever killed the maid must have a very twisted sense of humour. She smiles like a bemused shark.
Miss Pinerope, you came. Oh no, nothing so daffy. We put her in the old coffin as part of one of her exotic human obsequies.
Out of the corner of your eye, you can see Dave's jaw tense. It's a subtle tell, almost imperceptible if you don't know to look for it, but after years of living together, you've come to understand it as the equivalent of a brow raise. He's avoided eye contact with Terezi since she came in, which is pretty much the opposite of unusual, but now he isn't even looking at her face, but rather the baggy beige coat she has elected to wear. Apparently a grave violation of the ever-so-precious human funeral wardrobe etiquette. I know that, you goof. What I'm driving my ridiculous metaphorical scuttlebuggy at is that this is no way to conduct a criminal investigation. I need her body to be exactly where it was found, in the position it was found in, and outlined with pristine vanilla chalk. Anything less, and I'd be tempted to suspect you of trying to hide evidence. She lifts her hand and allows a miniature noose to slowly dangle between her fingers, swinging back and forth with uncomfortable weight, like the god-tier clock's fatal pendulum. Even after dozens of times seeing this exact bit, you still can't decide whether it is incredibly silly or genuinely menacing. Maybe both. Terezi's fully committed glare doesn't make the call easier, and you can't even quite imagine any expression short of full throttle ever gracing her features. The sharp lines of Pyrope's face strike you as inherently ill-suited to moderation. Chapter 3. A not insignificant quantity of catching up. Viewpoint. Aradia. You find yourself haunted by both cross-cultural confusion and profound disappointment due to the fact that human corpse parties appear to not actually require any corpses. Flagrant false advertisement. Out by the mausoleum, they are putting to rest an empty casket with all the ceremonial flavour befitting of a real cadaver, but none of the conceptual calories. Something about it is deeply upsetting to you, and you truly have no intention of getting sad at a corpse party. Surreptitiously, Solix and you snuck off to where the real action was happening. No one seemed to mind. Few even really cared about your arrival. You had reached Earthsea about an hour after Inspector Pyrope, and so you found yourself perfectly obscured amidst the sort of fallout her presence tends to cause. Terezi was circling the crowd, sniffing people's necks, asking uncomfortable questions and laughing maniacally at their answers. It wasn't too difficult to quietly retreat to the foyer where they had brought the real body and laid it out in a flawless reenactment of a genuine final moment. Artful, morbid, the sort of postmodern pose one can only strike in the aftermath of significant damage to the skeleton. You dance around the crime scene merrily, trying to take inspiration from the positioning of her limbs, but mostly failing due to the structural integrity of your own anatomy. No matter. It's the thought that counts. Solix lazily taps his foot to an imagined beat as he scrolls along on his palm husk. Finally, your companion finds a song he considers fitting and places the device on one of the many alabaster pedestals littering the hall. An unfamiliar note rings out. It's the one humans play to celebrate mortality, or so you are assured, although a strange, weighty melancholy lingers in the tune's upbeat rhythm. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. Enjoy yourself, while you're still in the pink. You do just that, spinning and sliding across the floor, throwing and catching and leading each other with all the practiced grace and professionalism that eons of dancing at the abyss of eternity afford. The years go by as quickly as a wink. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. A carapaced finger taps you on the shoulder mid-dip. Its owner, a rather nervous-looking basalt figure in a suit, explains in no unclear terms that they'll have to escort you off the premises if you wouldn't mind, that really there shouldn't be anyone in here at all, an interdict which had apparently not been sufficiently promulgated, they stammer. You and Solix exchange disappointed looks, but don't see much of a reason to make a fuss. the Carpathian leads you outside amidst further apologies for things they had absolutely no fault in. A sigh.
I had my suspicions you'd be here. Thank you, Lennox.
They prepare their exoskeleton for an entirely excessive bow before Kanaya interrupts.
No need for that, really. After all, I'm not...
She winces as her lips form the last syllable, realizing uncharacteristically late what she's saying.
Jane.
A moment of silence, but Lennox proves too polite to let it linger. With a hasty, "Of course, Miss Mariam Lalonde," they scuttle off. Miss Mariam Lalonde pinches the bridge of her nose, while her other hand shakily clutches a chalice of purple liquid.
I fear we have a not insignificant quantity of catching up to do.
Sneaking through the streets in disguise feels somewhat conspiratorial, but such is the curse of celebrity. You imagine that one tires of constant attention interruption rather quickly, especially when one isn't made of time. The streets are quieter than usual though, you're told. Global day of mourning. Swiftly Kanaya leads you through the doors of an unassuming little diner called the Canny Lucis, and up a staircase to the first floor. There you find a kitchen, as well as a single table near the window overlooking the unusual lack of bustle. The Jade-Blood sighs as she sits down, removing her ostentatious black veil, and so you too shed your obfuscatory accessories. You alert Solix to the fact that regular shades actually suit him quite well, but he returns to the signature red and blue regardless.
Not gonna happen, but thanks.
He orders a latte with 6 tablespoons of honey and a sprinkling of cinnamon, which causes Kanaya to snicker into the back of her hand.
I see your taste has remained impervious with regards to change, Sir Alexander.
It's the sort of thing which might easily be interpreted as a jab, but her voice carries only the soft note of homesick reminiscence.
No point flailing about in a doomed attempt to improve what's already fucking perfect.
You take your caffeinated beverage black, and Kanaya continues to sip from what you're almost certain is blood, from a strange ornate goblet. The little troll girl who brings the orders goes wide-eyed when she catches sight of you, and you make a playful shh gesture as you ruffle her long hair.
Oh, she won't tattle on us. Will you, Samani?
Samani shakes her head with wild fervour and the sort of unblemished earnestness that only children are capable of.
So the name of this place. You don't actually have Lusa here, do you? So who takes care of her?
Kanaya tenses up as though the lack of guardians were a personal failing of hers.
They tried. Years and years of intensive biotech research culminating in one genetic impasse after another. The first generation of Earth trolls were born into an orphanage system of sorts. Well managed, well funded, diligently cared for, though still no more than a stopgap solution dreamt up by optimists whose trust in the reintroduction of Lucy had not yet wilted in the icy winds of continuous, scientific disappointment. A little less than half of them spent their entire youth there, the rest were adopted. A few by humans, though in much greater number by Carpathians who did not have the capacity for genetic offspring of their own, but were drawn to the exotic idea of parenthood regardless. Perhaps a certain drive to impart guidance came pre-programmed by Scrub so they might better serve their role as exiles, or perhaps they were merely intrigued by this alien custom. In either case, they conducted themselves admirably on the whole, but this too was a mere stopgap. Humans, regarding themselves as the default in accordance with their nature, thought that trolls would simply adopt their family structure once the first generation reached adulthood. Some did, especially those raised by humans themselves. But on the whole, the two-parent structure never grew particularly popular to the point of being regarded as somewhat eccentric these days, a social atavism. What developed was a chimera described by some as a smooth continuation of the orphanage system without the orphanages, mixed with a further diffuse adaptation of the communal nature in which Carpathians go about everything. Regulars would be wards of the entire town they inhabited, cared for by everyone, guided by whoever is around. As they grew up, they develop interests and seek out tutelage deliberately. They build a hive with the help of the townsfolk, or move into pre-existing accommodations, should they not care for that particular tradition. Most of them find a mentor eventually, a single figure whose footsteps they seek to fill one day, much closer in nature to a corporeal ancestor than to human parents. When they reach the age of 13 and get to pick their auxiliary appellation, many of the young trolls choose the last name of their mentor. I have little doubt that Samani here will be Samani Aquil in 2 short years, for example. It's not formal, they're not bound, they continue to be wards of the city, welcome anywhere, cared for by anyone, but it's the structure that emerges. They pick a favourite adult one day and they start following them. It's not the same, of course, but it does appear to work. They seem happy. I just hope that it's not merely because they don't know the alternative. Never will.
There's an old sadness in her voice, the wistful, uncertain sort that dulls one's senses to beauty. You know it well and hate it fiercely. Gently you direct Kanaya's gaze back towards Samani, now on the other side of the room by the kitchen, jumping up and down in front of a man broader than he is tall and taller than is reasonable. The sparkle of her eyes is practically audible from where you're standing, and there can be little doubt that the giant's name is Aquil.
She doesn't look like she's missing anything, subconsciously or otherwise. Not even a little bit. I understand that you want to do everything right, but Alternia wasn't exactly custom-built to be a perfect environment for young trolls.
Understatement of the century. It was a flaming pile of shit and misery. It was a soldier factory designed by a manipulative creep with an orb for a head. If there was ever a blueprint for the place, it said Hell 2, now even fucking worse somehow, right on top. Good riddance.
Not exactly the way you would have put it, but by no means wrong either.
There's no reason to believe that the way it worked there was inherently better. Plenty of kids had bad Luci, plenty of kids had no Luci at all, plenty of kids got caught in the night for absolutely no reason. We grew up fine despite Alternia, not because of it.
It's been a while since you last made a serious expression, and you drop it like a hot plate the moment you realize what your face is doing. A smile befitting of the global day of mourning returns to your lips.
I think you're doing great, Kanaya.
You wave at the little girl, standing on her tippy toes on the opposite side of the coffee maker as she excitedly waves back.
It's like you said, this seems to work. That's more than can be said about most things in Paradox Space.
Hers are not the sorts of doubts that can be assuaged by one uncharacteristically sober conversation. They wouldn't still be haunting her so many years down the line if they could be, but the absence of a cure-all does not mean that bandages are useless. The woman opposite you sighs as she folds her hands.
Maybe, but the future of a species is not what I wish to talk to you about. At least not the specific aspect of it.
And so she tells you the kind of tale that ends in murder and leads to something even worse if it fails to end. There was much talk of Jane Crocker the person out by the empty casket, but this is the first time you're hearing of Jane Crocker the politician. Puzzle pieces begin to connect and you get queasy about the image they form. Jane was a cautious person. A deliberate person. A cautious, deliberate, and very, very scared person. Importantly, hers was not the sort of fear that leads one to shiver at unfamiliar sounds in the dark, or even that which causes one to carry excessive quantities of weapons for the sake of self-defense. It was the genre of fear which compels you to buy high-end security systems, the genre which installs cameras in all those places where untrustworthy people were not to be trusted. No one says it out loud because doing so would be entirely superfluous. You can all see the parallels where they scrape against your memory of Alternia. It was the preemptive, neurotic fear of the Condors, exiling adults to space, patrolling the streets with trigger-happy drones, culling those deemed inherently, genetically seditious. All to make sure, to make absolutely sure, to make horrifically, crushingly sure that she is safe. Solok gulps next to you. Those untrustworthy people who were not to be trusted were trolls, of course. Not the ones Jane knew personally, for the most part, but the idea of trolls. The species which had enslaved and laid waste to the future of her friends. The species which had occupations called legislaturators and the like, and whose meteoric envoy had killed half of its own number over the course of a brief trip through Paradox Space. Jane did not believe in nurture. Maybe she believed in it intellectually, but not in her gut, not enough to feel safe. The gut of Jane Crocker believed that the race was genetically, inherently savage, and the guts of enough humans and carapacians agreed for that to be concerning. Jane wasn't the president, but she was rich, influential, and rhetorically compelling enough to be almost as bad. In a few short years, once the pretense of not being in power had sufficiently eroded, she would have been the president, which would have meant restriction on troll reproduction and drones in the streets at the very least.
So, you know who killed her then?
I don't believe it would be wise to speculate in these matters, even in a place like the Canis. Speculation is unbecoming of a funeral. I am not nearly as concerned with the act itself as with its wider social repercussion. We need stability, Solix. We must not let Jane become a martyr lest her genre of fear festers and grows around that wound. That is why I sent for you, to use this little opening as best as we can, to be respectable, trustworthy, and visible, to convince the human gastrointestinal system where rational argument so tragically falters. Will you please stay until matters have settled down?
You glance over at Solix before nodding in quiet agreement. A little vacation is fine. Your beloved metacosmic eschaton isn't gonna go away anytime soon, after all. The thought nonetheless stings slightly. Drained by the grim tale, a faint but distinct smile flickers across Kanaya's lips, and her grip on the goblet appears to relax.
Thank you. Vospat, I believe we will have desserts.
Chapter 4. One More Thing. Viewpoint. None. Dave Strider shuffles through the courthouse almost soundlessly, tracing his fingers along the balustrades as he went. To Jade's great dismay, the man never made any noise while walking, beyond a faint yet constant mumbling, perhaps. His footfall as quiet as an air-cushioned feather. Almost being startled one too many times, she had forced him to knock on the door frame before entering any room, and somehow that habit was easier to learn than to unlearn. Now he did it even when Harley wasn't around. Alert taps rang out through the imposing architecture in a way that almost felt like echolocation, and which distracted him just enough to calm his nerves a little. Dave stopped. The last door of the corridor was actually locked, unlike the ones preceding it, and so he knocked below the interrogation sign instead. Behind a mahogany desk on which she rested her legs sat Inspector Pyrope, lazily flipping through notes. She was still enveloped in that ridiculous oversized coat and growing fonder of it by the minute. Wearing it sparked a feeling reminiscent of her old Flarp outfit, only without the unpleasant baggage. It made her feel competent, not just Terezi but Inspector Pyrope. She usually felt like the most capable person in the room, of course, and usually she was, but that wasn't the same as feeling competent. Not truly. Without the costume, it was just a frustrating awareness of how low the bar hung.
Ah, my express order of cool kit has arrived. Come in.
Sup, T-Dog, T-Rizzle, been a while since you took off, without a word, so, how's space been treating you? They took a brief pause to blink awkwardly at each other. Fuck no, this sucks, that's that over.
I'm afraid we don't have time for do-overs, Dave. There's a murderer on the loose. So any idle chit-chat and nostalgic jaw piles will tragically have to wait. Then again, I used to know a pretty rad dude whose whole deal was time, and he had this adorable little friend who shot straight off the power ladder and learned how to make do-overs take place.
She looked over her glasses as though this enabled her to see jack shit.
So, I really have to wonder, Mr. Strider, why there even is a murder which needs investigating in the first place.
It's not like Dave had failed to see this coming. It was the only reason why he should have been first to be called here, and still the man felt like he had failed to dodge a punch. Okay, first of all, time was never my deal. Time was a bullshit circuitous game mechanic that I stopped using as soon as I could, which is what any reasonable person would do. My deal is delirious beats and revolutionary artifact punk webcomics, which is all that ever had to be said in that matter. Just like mine isn't your deal. What would that even mean? Your deal is being this inexplicable cross between an insane puppet master and a trash goblin. Terezi did not interject that this was precisely what she thought it meant for one's deal to be mined. And second of all, you know why. Even disregarding how dangerous it is to send anyone back into a situation where it was somehow possible to kill a god tier, time travel premium is like the worst imaginable solution to any problem, even worse than time travel standard, which, wow, that sure wasn't a record that needed to be broken. The only reason we ever used it was that it was also the only solution. Jane lives, John lives in some new version of events, and all of us suddenly turn to paradox space dust. Fizzle out. John doesn't propose it because he knows we'll say no, also because he probably doesn't want to think about it. We're like his third set of friends, same but different, bunch of I can't believe it's not Dave backups of people he watched die in a doomed universe. At least I only ever had to mop up the blood of dead versions of myself, and that's traumatizing enough. Dave realized that he was speaking even faster than normal, but it was difficult not to. He took one deep breath to calm himself as blood-drenched striders flickered past on the inside of his shades. And of course we feel real to ourselves. We are real, but they're also real, and they probably didn't want to die either. All we've got going for us is the sick, nasty privilege of having a choice in the matter. Easiest trolley problem ever posed. One person versus the population of a whole planet. No thanks, buddy. Gotta sweeten that deal a little. For a moment, the universe enjoyed the rare pleasure of seeing Terezi Pyrope speechless. Wow, when I left, was there a sensibility vacuum which needed to be filled? A raging gyre of this troll disease called reason, drawing unsuspecting cool kids into itself. You've become a lot less gullible. It's almost a shame. Dave drew one corner of his mouth upwards by a fraction of a micron to produce what passed for a smile in Striderland. Some nuance inevitably got lost so close to the threshold of emotive measurability, but it was a sad, pensive smile. The sort you flash an old friend to convey the sentiment that they shouldn't worry too much. Might be, or maybe we just got less desperate. Living a few years without a gun pressed to your neck, spending a few nights which aren't filled with fuck tons of dead versions of yourself and everyone you've ever known. Doesn't take too much of that to restore your relationship with death to something marginally closer to not completely batshit fucking insane. Yes, that would all be very concerning if the person in question were too incompetent to maintain stable loops. Or if their style of time travel were a wholesale reality rewrite. But neither of those apply to you, do they, Dave? I can still die. Jumping back there, all rogue time cop with too much to lose is pretty much asking to croak heroic even under normal circumstances. Plus we have no idea what kind of crazy endgame weapon did that. The orbital anti-immortal laser could well have another shot in reverse just for my unsuspecting ass. And even if I didn't die, I couldn't save Jane because then the loop wouldn't be stable since she clearly hasn't been saved. Dave, you only die if you don't save yourself. The lack of confidence is unbecoming of a cool kid, you know. And you could figure out who did it without risking any damage to the timeline. So, why would you deflect by hiding behind Egbert's limitations, or hypothetical risks for weenies who don't know how to time travel without ending up dead? It just doesn't make sense. There's double the delicious cherry in your prejurious words, isn't there, Mr. Strider? Carcat won't let you. So what? If it weren't for the fact that Dave never failed to look composed, he would have to compose himself. Fuck, did she get there quickly. Like, of course I want to know who's out there and why, or if we all suddenly became mortal again and nobody told us, but we literally don't know how big of a risk that is right now. Whatever legendary ninja technique ignores immortality might not care for loop stability either, perfected over generations in some remote village by eccentric masters too off the local deity for slighting their grandfather, unwise to mess with that sort of shit. So, no, you just can't force me to go on a potential suicide mission. I suppose I can't. With that freshly acquired sensibility of yours, you have to understand that this makes both you and your boyfriend look very suspicious. She crackled like an esoteric printer error. Look, I'll do it if I have to, if it seems like we're in danger, but I just don't think we are. I was going to ask this anyway, since you seemed so calm, but now I'm really curious. It sounds a whole lot like you have a suspect in mind, Mr. Double Cherry. They could have played this entire game move by move. Dave could have refused to say anything, just like he had refused to time travel, and the investigator would have grinned and added a bright red tally mark to an imaginary scoreboard. But there really wasn't much point in that. His suspicion didn't actually throw anyone under the bus, since Terezi would investigate everyone anyway, and it wasn't like he had evidence. All it did was appear cooperative. Okay, let's for a second pretend like you don't already know what I think, and like you aren't just testing whether I'll say it. Oh wow, Terezi, what a chill and totally normal communicational maneuver free of paranoid bullshit, says the lobotomized version of myself who believes this, drooling wildly as he does so like a bell-crazed dog with a hole in its throat. Let's see. We have a crime that can only be committed with an obscure game mechanic that none of us know about, unless Jane managed to heroically or justly fall off a balcony, of course, which I won't even fully discount. A sick enough stunt of the balustrade can probably do that to you, gotta watch your step. Then there's the fact that our victim is the primary danger to Kanaya Mariam's lifework, and obviously the person resorting to murder would have to have a few loose screws rattling about that oversaturated head of hers. So Rose. All of those point to Rose. Thank you. Pass. Goodbye, Dave. You will hear from me. Sure, don't be a stranger. The man couldn't help but leave some bitterness in those words. She'd left them before, after all. Almost out of the door, Dave turned back around, as though he had forgotten something. Oh, one more thing. Nice coat. He gave an implacable 16th of a smile as he left the interrogation room, and Inspector Pyrope didn't like the smell of it in the least. A bright red tally mark was added to an entirely unrelated imaginary scoreboard. Viewpoint, Calliope. You tend to have a rather light sleep. In part, surely, because you do not sleep at all, never the regular variety, and, since you died, not even the irregular variety. A shudder runs through your spine at the thought of your brother awakening in this bed next to Roxy. Wakefulness does not prevent nightmares. Then again, perhaps you do experience a sleep light of sorts, as though your consciousness lost saturation at night, growing muted and distant. Maybe it's because you never properly predominated, and so yourself still grows faint in an attempt to submerge, just without a horrible sibling to take over. Nevertheless, the feeling isn't exactly unpleasant, and it makes it easier to lie still for 8 hours. You want to lie still. 5 years have not robbed the experience of sleeping next to Roxy of any of its magic, and so you put your headphones on and listen to music, podcasts, audio dramas, and sometimes just the sound of their breath until they wake up in the morning and your consciousness drifts into undiluted focus again. All of this is to say that you tend to have a rather light sleep light. And this definitely isn't a sound the mansion tends to make. As you open your eyes, the foyer's far-off ceiling comes into blurry view. Right, you're here. Had the funeral gone according to plan, then Roxy would have surely stopped insisting on sleeping next to the coffin, but now Jane's body was back, and so you decided that it was probably easier to just ask Jake if you could move your bed here. Temporarily. You really hope temporarily. Of course you miss Janie as much as everyone else, but resting next to the crime scene doesn't help you with those feelings. It just creeps you out and makes you feel like an intruder. Slowly you turn your head to see what Jake is doing at this time of night, but the person who stands there, Jane over his shoulder, making sure not to disturb the chalk outline, is almost a full head too short to be the mansion's owner. Your dilute consciousness takes its sweet time to make sense of this scene.
Dirk, I wouldn't dare accuse you of anything untoward, but blimey, there aren't too many good reasons for nightly corpse napping that I can think of right now. Would you mind explaining what this is?
The intruder freezes before face-palming. Shh! Please, there's no reason to make a big deal out of this. Standard forensics procedure when the lead investigator doesn't let you do basic forensics, though that itself is admittedly a pretty non-standard fucking forensic scenario. Anyway, she'll be back before you know it, I just need to run some tests. He pauses, perhaps realizing how insane this sounds. You know I wouldn't do anything to Jane, right? Yes, of course you know that, but your night brain is still very hung up on the corpse napping part and has elected to run in circles. Roxy stirs on the other side of the bed.
Homies, what?
They look to you, then to Dirk, and then give a slow little nod as though they suddenly understand everything. Somehow that's enough to calm you as well, despite the fact that it clearly shouldn't. If you had to translate Roxy's facial expression in that moment, the resultant sentiment would go something like, "Oh, it's the dream where Dirk steals Jane's body. I don't have the energy for that one right now." And so they go back to sleep as though nothing had happened.
Do you think this will help with the investigation?
I mean, obviously I don't know that, but we can't just sit on our hands, right? Please, Callie, she'll be back before sunrise. You can tell Inspector Pyrope about this once I'm done. I'll turn myself in pre-cuffed if you want. That still doesn't assuage all your fears, but you can imagine less reasonable terms for a corpse napping. You nod.
Okay, back before sunrise. I trust you, Dirk. Please take good care of her.
Chapter 5. Alone with Company. Content warning. Discussion of suicide. Viewpoint. Dirk. Thick butyl gloves adorn both your hands as lightning tears the sable sky to minuscule tatters. The coruscating glow casts your stark shadow over the body of a dear friend, splayed out across an operating table. No. Reviving her isn't within your power yet, is it? But you can conduct more of an examination than the perfunctory garbage carried out by some random guy with a medical degree. Singular. You have 3 medical degrees, and you weren't even trying that hard. one out of curiosity, one to play a role in a movie, and one as a joke. Theirs, on the other hand, must have been joke all the way through. Pathetic. None of the reagent vials to your left seem to have changed colour yet, but there's still time. If there isn't, you'll get time. A hopeful thought chimes above the monotone soliloquy of your post-mortem report that perhaps whatever residual life energy preserves her body and things next to it might also preserve foreign substances in her blood. You tell her to pipe down until it has evidence. It obliges. Just who the hell was this chump anyway? They noted all the various fractures without getting wise to the fact that no one falls like that. No one plummets off a balcony that high and doesn't try to use their limbs to somehow protect themselves. It's a biological inevitability, a confluence of instincts and reflexes refined and polished by centuries of evolution. So why could you not see any attempt at self-preservation? Maybe there had been at least a hint of that question in the mind of the medical examiner, even though the light bulb atop their head wasn't screwed in properly. A faint whisper. Maybe that's why they bothered to run a basic tox screen and no more. It did reveal alcohol, a decent amount of it too, but surely not enough to disable such foundational evolutionary safeguards. Surely. There's another voice, which your monologue of minutiae is attempting to drown out. It's the one that compelled you to steal a corpse in the first place, and it's not nearly as optimistic as the former. Dirk, it whispers, you know how one might accomplish a just death. You've been making contingency plans for years. All it takes is willpower and a deliberate lack of self-preservation. Jump? Splot. For people who aren't you, alcohol might make that easier. Jane didn't kill herself. Since you can't very well strangle yourself for having the thought, you smash an empty vial instead. She wouldn't. But the reagents still don't show any sign of color change. Maybe you do need an earlier sample, or maybe there really is a weapon which can kill gods without leaving a mark. If only you had access to the archives. If you had access to the archives, you wouldn't need to be doing this now, would you? And reading the narrative, if you don't specifically know what you're looking for, is a non-starter as well. Finally, one of the mixtures turns black. Strychnine, huh? That's not a definite case against suicide, but it would be an odd choice, a bad choice, a painful choice. The muscle spasms would, however, explain why she didn't try to catch herself. And autopsy report. An affirmative beep before you let yourself slump against the wall in emotional exhaustion. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Throws up more questions than you had before, but questions are the first step towards getting answers, so that should still be a victory. And yet, it feels hollow. Maybe you're just tired, an unfamiliar sensation, but to be expected since you haven't exactly slept recently. Maybe you can find room for a nap in your schedule after you've returned Jane and before you present your findings to Terezi, half an hour or so. People can say what they will about the pony show, but it taught you the important lessons. Make sure to sleep at least once a week, and keep your cool around old selves so you don't have to worry about going it's about time levels of batshit. Standing upon the shoulders of fictional equine giants means that you won't ever have to learn these sorts of invaluable life strats the hard way. Thank you, Twilight. You perform an ironic little salute towards the lightning-torn sky. The roster of obvious questions has been doubled. How does one disable conditional immortality, and the central whodunit, were joined by why poison, and how did Jake not notice his fiancée's spasms and likely screaming in the throes of motor nervous pandemonium? But what about the non-obvious questions? Where would Jane have looked? A couple of years ago you might have built a simulation of her in an attempt to find out, but you've since grown disillusioned with those. One can only explain loop quantum gravity to AI Newton or German idealism to AI Plato so many times before one realizes that the response is always eerily similar to what you were expecting. From there, it only takes a short cascade of shallow epiphanies to realize that it might not be because you can perfectly predict every genius throughout history, but because you are making copies of your understanding of them, which, shockingly, hold unsurprisingly few surprises for you. Dead end. You can't revive her, and you can't make a Jane AI either. At best, you can make a brain ghost Jane AI to look in exactly those places where you would expect Jane to look in, offering no novel insight. Story of your life. All you seem to be capable of is making splinters of yourself pretending to be someone else. Dirks behind every mask. You'd better return the body now. Viewpoint. None. Print carried significant disadvantages as a medium, despite how cool it looked. The slower rate of update for one, but the way in which newspaper pages turned to mush between Terezi Pyrop's tongue proved to be an even more fructuous source of disrelish. Not for the investigator herself, but certainly for the people who had to observe the process, in frozen, vaguely fascinated disgust. An information-dense symphony of stracciatella against her taste buds. Cheerily, Terezi rolled a paragraph about Aradia and Solix's new apartment to a sticky ball in her mouth, before taking the opportunity to present it to the transfixed barista upon the platter of her tongue. Both of them gulped. The investigator swallowed.
Hey!
Jade essentially shouted as she threw herself around the troll from behind.
Hello, Jade. Please, take a seat, though I'm afraid I can't guarantee much confidentiality in this setting.
I know. Thanks for agreeing to meet me here.
Condensation obscured her eyes behind the enormous round glasses as she blew upon her cup of masala chai, wafting the thick, warm scent of spices towards Terezi. It felt like a gift of sorts, a friendly gesture between people who never had time to properly become friends. Jade hadn't gotten into much detail about why this was necessary. She was tired of explaining it, tired of pretending like her experience could be reduced to words, but luckily the investigator hadn't forced her to. She just accepted the suboptimal locale with something like understanding in her voice. Possibly, hopefully, understanding. If anyone could relate to her, it was the girl who grew up alone in a treehouse, who had just come back from a solitary trek through the dead nothingness of Paradox Space. But then again, Terezi did that second one willingly, which was incomprehensible. The absence of voices made Jade Harley anxious. The prolonged absence of touch. Without the comforting hum of sentient life around her, space began to compress and the black sludge of existential loneliness seeped in through every pore to crowd her thoughts and strangle her. Just like that. Always exactly like yesterday. A second of silence which might for others be calming transported her back across light years, onto the deck of a golden battleship whisking through immeasurable nothingness, crushingly and utterly alone. Jade Harley knew what silence sounded like, and she never wanted to hear it again.
Right. There's something which has been bothering me about this case. Surely you can shine some light on the matter.
Shoot.
Terezi was smelling for shifts in expression, but not finding anything obvious. The girl opposite her just wagged her tail as she sipped the intriguing beverage.
May I?
Of course.
She slid the cup over with both hands like a peace offering. Maybe it was one, on behalf of Dave or in spite of him. The tea tasted similar to the way it smelled, yet somehow even louder, even warmer. Definitely the flavor Tawny would invoke for Terezi from now on.
Delicious, but enough with the distractions. See, Dave and Kaka told me that you were with them on the night in question, but that's not true, is it, Miss Harley?
Well, we don't know when exactly she died, but I was with Dave Cat when they fell asleep, so they weren't lying to you.
But you weren't with them when they awoke. Is that not suspicious?
Not really. I always get up before those two, and I rarely stay in the house just to listen to Kakat snore.
The glimmer of panic from before disappeared as quickly as it came on, but Terezi was certain that it wouldn't take much to bring it back.
Let me put it another way then. Does this picture mean anything to you?
She presented a comparatively dry page of newspaper. The investigator had to buy 2 copies, since the first did not survive a thorough reading.
The Crocker Cop fires? Doing that kind of thing now is like in super bad taste, if you ask me. Spiteful and honestly, like, a bit larpy. But it's not like those protesters don't have very valid concerns either. What does this have to do with anything?
The other picture. UFO sighting. See that spam and flash in the sky?
It's black and white, Terezi.
Doesn't matter. I know what color it is. Just look at that downright crunchy outline. It's got an entire mouth feel. Like Pop Rocks on her first Guardian. Jade flinched. Rutal Gemini, the man who captured this phenomenon, didn't know what to make of it. But I'd recognize the taste anywhere. So, Miss Sour Apple Pop Rocks, why were you flying over the human kingdom at 4:30 a.m. on the night of the murder? That's rather early, is it not? And so very far from home, too. She set her cap down slowly, and Terezi could feel in the vibrations of the table that the dog girl's tail was no longer wagging.
Yes, it is early. I was having bad dreams that night. I kept waking up to a point where I just said, screw it, and flew up to the shooting range. There are ones in the Troll Kingdom, but none which take too kindly to people using them in the middle of the night. So, yeah, that's me.
A shooting range.
I know that sounds silly, but it makes me feel in control, okay? Like, I'm not quite so powerless. Like, nothing can harm me. And of course I know that's absurd, I know that. Dark here makes me the single strongest being on this planet. Even the best firearm is a fucking rounding error to my power level. But we've seen too much for it to feel that way. If you have a gun, you're safe. That's the story I told myself as a child, and it's the story that stuck. Mocha Hyphus can confirm that I was there that night. It's her range.
I see. And how far is it to the Crocker estate from that place? Approximately.
20 minutes with a car, not less for me.
There was definitely some truth to Jade's story, but not nearly enough to mask the odd aftertaste it left in Inspector Pyrope's mouth. She smiled pleasantly.
It doesn't look like you have much of an alibi, Miss Pop Rocks, even if the owner corroborates your story. But that alone hardly makes you guilty, of course.
Terezi was about to let her leave, but something about the previous interview didn't sit quite right with her.
Jade, did Dave say anything to you after our talk?
Well, I'm sure you noticed, but he was pretty hurt by your sudden departure, and he and Iron Carcat get that you have your own shit to deal with, and don't owe him your company, but I also get that he feels abandoned, so yeah, we talked about that, but honestly I feel like it's a conversation the two of you would be better off having amongst yourselves.
I see.
No, you don't.
Thank you, Jade. You may go.
This wasn't what she had been concerned about, but maybe she should have been. Fuck. Terezi remembered the end of her flap days, how hurt she had been by Riska's refusal to play by the rules, not because the rules were so monumentally important, the rules were important, but they weren't that important, but because it meant that she valued her own shit more than their relationship, and their relationship wasn't even anything huge back then. They were kids. They didn't get the huge shit yet, certainly not the quadrant-blurred mess they had now. Vriska's own shit was trying not to get killed by her bitch of a Lucis for Gog's sake. But that knowledge did very little to squash the feeling of having been dropped like an old toy by your best friend/puppy crush. What Jade described wasn't the same, but it did seem like it hit a number of familiar notes. Never in her life had Terezi Pyrope considered the possibility that she could make someone else feel that way, even on a smaller scale. Shit. Chapter 6. It's Been Real. Content warning. Irresponsible use of substances. Viewpoint. Roxy.
Janie, I don't know if I can do this for much longer.
The dead body on the floor next to you doesn't answer, but its brain ghost counterpart, standing in the same exact spot, does. She's looking down on you, fake physically as well as figuratively, which you guess must mean that you're looking down on yourself by proxy, which is dumb and circular and basically doesn't make any sense whatsoever. She's not been there since her death. You fail to not see her, despite the fact she's not been there for just as long. Not in any way that matters, at least. Sometimes, when no one's listening, the two of you talk.
Do what? No one's forcing you to be here.
Yeah, lol. That's like kind of the entire fucking issue. Hey Rolal, why don't you just move on from your best friend being dead? Not like anyone's forcing you to still be a miserable wreck because of that, Lamau. You don't feel like you have to grieve like this. Like you have to squat in Jake's manor like a full-on loony bins insane person. It's more akin to not knowing how not to do that. The chains binding you to this place are a law of physics, an anchor, a universal reference point. Jane is where reality is. Leaving here would be accepting that reality was over, eternity had ended, normalcy was dead, and someone had killed her. You produce a faint, exhausted laugh in the vague direction of a person who isn't there. You know, back in my little ocean colony surrounded by pumpkins and voracious fucking chess guys and booze, I somehow never thought of you as living in the past. It was always that I lived in the future and that the present, like the real present, was where you were. And obviously those are the same thing, it's kind of just semantics. But the maladaptive rabbit hole goes way deeper than that. Your experience was just plainly more real than mine, and I was no more than some kooky broad from a fake dystopia novel. Which you definitely didn't help with, TBH. When the most level-headed person you know pulls their skeptic shtick on you for years, disbelieving the basic parameters of your existence, then you do start to trust their reality over yours. You hesitate. These are the sorts of words which can break things that mustn't be broken just as easily as those which should be. I don't want to call it gaslighting because, you didn't fucking know, but them's still the depressing ass breaks. And I even kind of liked it in a screwed up way, because my fake dystopia novel sucked. I can't count the number of times I went to bed blackout drunk, sincerely hoping, praying that it was all just a bad dream, and that I'm a wake up in reality with my best friend Jane, where we can do all the things normal teens are supposed to do. Go to parties and give each other makeovers, and maybe open a detective agency to find missing pets. For years that was the happiest thought my giant useless hacker brain could muster. That you were right and that my experiences weren't real. And despite how nice of a feeling that was to fall asleep to, I think it really fucked me up in the long run. Because now I don't know how to let go of that anchor without it feeling like betrayal. The exhale doesn't give you any of the release you're hoping for. All that tension remains painfully stuck in your throat, like an uncooperative hairball of emotion, and more will be needed to get it out. Why was it specifically Jane? In part, surely, because she was the one most adamantly insisting on the reality of her reference point, but also because she was the most safe? Dirk was a wild ocean current in his own right, reliable and stalwart, but not stable in the same way. He also came with the baggage of being a fellow shitty dystopia resident, something that no one in their right mind would ever wish to be tethered to. And Jake? You love the guy dearly, but he's the opposite of solid ground to stand upon. He is a series of impossible leaps of faith and bright, genuine smiles when he inevitably eats shit and brushes the dust off his shorts only to jump again. At the time, this was compounded by English occupying a strange quantum state of being both your dear sweet friend and also designated boy to the lascivious vials of an entire friend group. Anchoring yourself to Jake, regardless of how bad a choice it would have been either way, would have meant a distinct risk of having to surrender him to Jane or Dirk. So, no, you weren't exploiting Jane for stability. She was just the only option. The alternative would have been...
Not to put too fine a point on it, Roxy, but it sounds like you're blaming me for your mental hang-ups, and I can't abide by that.
No, I'm blaming myself, idiot. You just made the amateur mistake of being in my brain while it annihilates itself with these weapons-grade revelations, just tearing into the metaphysical hang-up pile with wild abandon.
And you believe that to be healthy behaviour?
Would you stop it with the imaginary condescension while I'm talking myself through this? Of course I don't. I'm not as stupid as you seem to think I am, despite my hang-ups. But Callie's off with Jade again, doing adorable effing draw piles for the second time in a row now. I may not be max observant like detective pants, but I do notice their stuff. Being here isn't healthy for them. So I gotta find a way to dump these Jane chains, these Janes. Even if it's not up to the elusive fucking standard of acceptable coping, because otherwise I'd be letting them down. So fuck it, let's be hells of self-destructive up in this bitch.
Jake's home bar is stocked to the brim and right next to the eastern staircase, a mere glass house dwelling stone's throw away from your temporary bedroom. Fucking English. You know it's not that he doesn't care, he just doesn't think very much. The bottles didn't even pose any danger, you weren't ever actually tempted to relapse, but addiction, even bygone addiction, is a powerful thing. Just being in one room with the spirits is a constant scraping at old parts of your wiring, a permeating shapeless awareness of their presence, like dark shadows shackling the objects which cast them in place. And right now, that shapeless awareness is making itself heard, blending in with all your other flailing attempts to find a way out of this house. You can't be serious. Didn't you say you wanted to not let people down?
This is me letting you down. Bold fucking claim from Miss I liked you better when you were drinking? That's the worst thing anyone's ever said to me. You know that, right? And it wasn't like a slip of the tongue. Like, no one says that kind of thing on accident. You said it because you knew how much it would hurt my recently recovered ass. Oh, now. And I guess that's not even true anymore. This is the worst top spot on the roller Alpine scale, been usurped by the news of you being gone 5 ever. So I guess you're off the hook for that? It was sure a good run.
Roxy.
Are you telling me it's a bad idea?
A sense of challenge permeates your voice, and you don't know why you put it there.
It's a terrible idea. This is ridiculous. By asking me what you should do, you're forcing me into the exact position you're complaining about. I'm not real. You're putting these words in my mouth in order to incite some confrontation that allows you to move on, because I'd be dictating your reality again. Well, I'm not playing.
Foiled by your own mental construct, savagely called out and rebuked within an inch of your damn life in the confines of your own skull. Of course your projection of Jane would be imminently reasonable about this stuff. The flailing revs up. You really don't want to go there.
But you don't think I can stop?
Roxy, of course I don't. Do you remember how many times you told me that you could stop? You probably don't, but I do. I'm really trying to be supportive here, but those failed experiments in sobriety vastly outnumber the one time you actually managed to stop. It's simple statistics. Your plan is bad, and I'm telling you that it's bad, not because I want to dictate your reality, but because I care about you.
That's fine. Watch me, brain ghost.
You grab a fancy vodka and start chugging it, pushing down all your internal screaming. Not a drop has crossed these lips in years, nor will one ever again. That's a promise to you and you alone. Your hands are trembling wildly, to the point where the bottleneck might chip a tooth. Dread, disgust, purpose. 1/3, stop. Wordlessly, Jane stands before you, frozen in shock and captured by your glare. You want to vomit. Not because of the alcohol, but because of what it invokes in you. Days and months and years, blotted out, blurry, and just numb enough to deal. Your smile slowly steadies itself while a faint rivulet of burning liquid runs down one corner of your mouth. You put the spirit back in the cabinet.
I'm so sorry.
You sob. It's directed at yourself more so than at Jane, but also kind of at Jane for trying to cast her as the villain in this situation. It was the only thing you could think of. She'd been a great friend, your best friend, but that didn't change the fact that she never truly believed in you. When you quit drinking the first time, all by yourself while everyone else was too caught up in their own drama to even pay attention to you, that was the first time you ever really felt that you were real, that you and the rest of the universe didn't revolve around Jane, because Jane was wrong. You could do this, and you needed to remind yourself of that. There exists a reality tethered to Roxy Lalonde, a reality which has always been tethered to Roxy Lalonde as much as to anyone else, and you can go there and enter it. Still shaking, you place a hand on the doorknob, and for the first time since that day, your body allows you to turn it. Meticulously maintained hinges refuse to creak as they swing open, but the weight which they carry can be felt regardless. Lennox, who's cutting some decorative bushes on the other side, beams elatedly at the sight of you.
I'm gonna be out for a stroll, okay? Tell Kelly if she gets back before I do.
They ask if you need anything, a coat, or maybe a freshly prepared picnic basket in case hunger strikes amidst the beautiful bucolic scenery. They could whip something up in no time at all, the Carpathian insists, but you tell them you'll be fine. The slight chilliness makes you feel aware of your body in a pleasant way, and they seem to understand. "Bye, Len," you call as you step into the brisk evening. The sky is drenched in lilac, like an old piece of fine silk slowly suffocating the setting sun. It would be breathtaking if the sight weren't obscured by tears creeping into the corners of your vision. You still feel nauseous, and in some ways, it seems like you've just exchanged one flavor of grief for another, less stationary one. Like you've traded numbness for a pain that had considerately been waiting right around the mental corner to pounce on you once you're ready for the impact. The pain has decided that its time has come and brings you to your knees.
It will get better eventually, I promise.
She's still here, huh? You somehow thought you'd left her at the doorstep, but apparently you haven't.
Oh, that's not how mourning works, silly. Though, since I'm you, I'm admittedly also a bit surprised.
Lol. I guess we should keep going then? I know it was dumb what I did back there, by the way. Really shouldn't trust myself with that stuff, no matter how sure I feel. But trusting myself anyway was kind of the exact thing I felt like I needed to do. And it worked, so yay, bad and dangerous decision making. But then there's always poor, sweet, counterfactual Roxy, who fucked her sitch up even worse, because she couldn't handle it. Counterfactual. Also, I probably should have considered that my Toblerone is back to 0. Tolerance. But here we are.
That is indeed where we seem to be. I'm proud of you, even though it was a terrible idea.
As you talk, still not free but freer than before, the scent of smoke catches your attention, wafting in dark clouds over a nearby hill. Chapter 7. Revealed by Fire. Viewpoint. Jade. Karkat is giving a well-known spiel about how much he hates being the spiritual leader to people he vaguely disagrees with, when the phone rings. He doesn't actually hate it, of course. You think he probably enjoys it immensely, but your cantankerous boyfriend is the sort of person who will implode if he runs out of things to publicly complain about.
Hiya, how... Oh, yes, of course, Kelly, I'll tell them.
Fuck. A venomous chill runs down your spine.
Oh, how convenient. Another anonymous phone call whisking you away to God knows which mind-numbingly made-up activity, just so you don't have to listen to me lay out in painstaking, blood-curdling detail the troubles of our insufferable trash fire of a temporal interval, by which I of course mean specifically those which pertain to me personally. Isn't that what people are supposed to do in Earth-human relationships? Listen with lobotomized attentiveness to the triple-distilled pan garbage dripping like steaming hot saliva from our respective ignorance shoots. How could your unsufferingly fugacious ways deny me even the simplest of pleasures, Jade? Have you finally discovered the capacity for maladroit hatred in your gooey dog heart?
Oh my god, Karkat, shut the fuck up! Just because you refuse to personalize ringtones doesn't mean that a call is anonymous.
Okay, I didn't know you'd...
I said shut up! Roxy's missing. Get your clothes, I'll wake up Dave, and if you try to say a single word about how your help won't be necessary, I'll show you just how great my capacity for exceedingly non-gooey hatred is. In fact, I will demonstrate it on very, very, very delicate parts of your anatomy, and take great pleasure in doing so. Are we clear?
You allow a bit of First Guardian energy to crackle menacingly between your fingers, weaving in and out of reality in lambent fulminations of exotic matter, but the additional threat seems to not be necessary. Karkat is already bolting upstairs, a cascade of Doppler-shifted fucks and shits growing ever more distant. In the corner of the living room, your other boyfriend sits passed out at his desk, head slumped to the side and drooling into one of the myriad panels of acoustic foam that cover all parts of the wall not occupied by posters or photo collages. A light tap on the doorframe is enough to instantaneously jolt Strider awake. Shit, you look worried. Did Karkat try to cook again? Did Karkat try to eat something he cooked again? An exclamation which might conceivably have been, "Eat my engorged bulge, shitface," filters down from above as you explain the situation to Dave. His face very much that of a boy who has just been told that his non-binary mom's gone missing. What do we do?
As far as we know, they left on foot, and there's nothing in the logs of nearby transportalizer pads. But we're talking about Roxy, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Stupid, lousy, goddamn hackers. So for now, they're scouting the surrounding area in teams of 2. It might be best if you carry Karkat. A unit with both flight and night vision is more useful than 2 units with 1 each, and...
Dave places a hand on your shoulders. Breathe. We're gonna find them. Just port Karkat and me wherever you think is best, okay? Like on cue, a now fully dressed Vantas joins your makeshift strategy meeting, and you zap both of them into one of the larger bits of curated forest surrounding the Crocker estate. This makes 5 teams for 5 sectors. Callie and Jake, Solix and Aradia, Dave and Karkat, John and Terezi, and the very politically uncomfortable Dirk and Kanaya, since Rose is apparently in no condition to exert herself. You don't even bother with the door, instead leaping for the open window. The ball of your foot only touches the sill for a fractional instant before Guardian energy seizes your form and catapults you outside. Houses, fields, and rivers frantically blur past a journey that only takes a few seconds for you, enveloped by a neon force that looks like wild, crackling electricity and feels like universes colliding and coming apart at the pulse of eternity. An experience universally understood and once succinctly described as having an entire mouthfeel. Above the alabaster pedestal, your body comes to a standstill, crisp night cooling the superheated pocket of air around you. Molecules swirl in place as though confused by their sudden and violent dislocation. You aren't. The scents which gather in your nostrils paint landscapes and events in vivid colors, bleeding out towards the edges of your awareness as a sea of dark purple. It's a bit overwhelming, and the rogue is difficult to spot in even the most thorough of sensory maps. Swiftly, a headset clips into place behind your additional set of ears, so as to dissipate the sheer quiet of sufficient elevation.
Status report?
No, son.
Nothing so far.
A drat, it's rather few tidings here as well, I fear. This is nauseatingly undignified, but no.
We haven't found Roxy yet, but there seems to be a fire.
Fire. You smell again, and a wall of acrid carcinogenic smoke hits you like a truck, flinging your olfactory system into signal chaos. This must be where they are. No one else could have masked something like this from your senses. Quickly, everyone is ported to the source, a Crocker Corp storage facility dousing the smog-filled night in a warm, orange glow cast by lapping flames. People were carrying salvaged goods back and forth, trading them or sorting them into neat piles for the benefit of others. Still more are just standing around talking. Some teenagers dance in the flickering light. A few trolls are carrying signs or wearing New Alternia pins, but not enough to constitute a majority or even a particularly large minority. They are, however, numerous enough to make you suspect that the fire wasn't an accident. The mood feels uncertain as to whether it wishes to be momentous or nonchalant, and settles on a strange heterogeneous mixture which separates the moment you show up. A small pocket already exists in the crowd, where looters keep a respectful, though not apprehensive distance from the gods played out in the grass. John notices them before you do, dissolving into breeze and reconstituting right there on the side of the hill.
Roxy, are you okay?
You follow without even thinking about it. They don't look hurt, and despite the tear-ruined state of their makeup, there's an odd sort of smile on Roxy's face.
June, what? Yeah, totally. Like, really? Fine. Finer than I've been in way too fucking long. I'm just exhausted from carrying all these boxes and shit. Unreal quantities of boxes. Quantities? Actually, that's not much better, is it, lol? What I mean is all the frickin' boxes. All of them? Crap. Did I lose track of time? June, talk to me. You look really worried, and it's sort of scaring the shit out of me. I'm fine,
Both of their faces are suddenly frozen.
June?
Despite the slight, disconcerting slurredness of Roxy's speech, this syllable seems deliberate, cutting clearly through the noise of the fire. You can smell ethanol on their breath, but it wasn't that. It was a substance far more volatile. A secret. The rest of your group has caught up, and while Callie and Dirk are kneeling next to Roxy, gently stroking their cheeks and shining a flashlight into their eyes respectively, the rest of you are staring at Egbert. She looks desperately in either direction, briefly begins to laugh, and then immediately gives up on it. If there ever was a moment to convince you that this wasn't exactly what you were thinking, that moment has passed. Not finding any comfortable place for her gaze to settle, it returns to Roxy.
I'm glad you're okay, and I'm really sorry, but I can't do this right now.
More puzzle pieces slot into place than you know what to do with, and while one part of your mind beats itself up about why she didn't tell you or why you didn't notice, another, more useful portion propels your muscles forward to hug your ecto-sibling. In the symphonic interplay of smoke and breeze, you can just about see the first moments of her contours dissociating before your hands grasp around empty air. Viewpoint: none. The investigator sighed, her small statue slowly vanishing in the folds of a massive leather armchair. On the couch opposite, Rose Lalonde Mariam looked like she was very much on the out side of drifting in and out of consciousness.
I hope I haven't made the arduous journey to your residence for nothing.
When the seer's eyes flicker open, it smelled like an act of maintenance, like her eyelids were attempting to shoo a speck of dust away rather than granting her vision. Rose almost inhaled the cigarette butt stuck in one corner of her mouth, evidently having forgotten that it was there.
I suppose the merit of that hope hinges very much on its specific shape,
she lilted softly as though caught in a dream.
A journey to Pythia only rewards you if knowledge made useless by its own veracity. Oedipus can only learn of things which he cannot change, or rather, things which acquire the amaranthine patina of causal immutability by way of learning about them. A story haphazardly scrawled on one side of the same Mobius strip. So, the journey is always for nothing, as you put it, in that...
Maneuvering her body into a position slightly closer to the sitting end of supine, Rose produced the sharp genre of stilted yelp that causes onlookers to wince in empathetic pain.
In that any insight gained is necessarily copacetic with the intricate weave of deterministic potentiality, though this crucially doesn't prevent it from being utterly vital in order to set up dominoes where they will have already fallen.
Much as I miss your meteor lectures on incestuous myths and Helioplex ontology, Rose, you know very much that that's not what I meant.
Of course, pardon the acertitious observation. I am merely attempting to distract myself from the headache currently grinding my cognitive faculties into the grooves of its outsole, hoping desperately that it's not too much of an inconvenience for you, Inspector.
Looking a bit like a French philosopher suffering from terminal cancer, she placed a new cigarette between her lips and asked Terezi to light it. The flame cast a soft glow across her pallid face. Apparently, she had been like this for 3 days now, a recurrent condition, though never quite so extreme.
Speaking of the places where dominoes have fallen, I must admit that I'm surprised you're speaking to me before Kanaya. I would hate for you to believe my wonderful wife clad in the dull garb of Venomoid in acuity.
How could I? Miss Lalonde Mariam, I assure you that I regularly dream of how it might have smelled when she clobbered Vriska, kicked a terrible clown in the groin, and bisected one of my worst acquaintances. It must have been a smorgasbord comprised of only the most personally cathartic of hues.
Terezi's plan had been to question the rainbow drinker first, though when she relayed this plan, the response had been something to the tune of,
I see no reason why I should cooperate with this investigation, and no means by which you might force me to.
A sentiment which she referred to as
the ancient Earth-human principle known as ACAB. Did she really?
Rose produced the best chuckle her condition allowed for.
And I assume you want me to change her mind on that most vaunted philosophical postulate of ours?
Is that an offer?
Of course not, though I don't intend to be similarly uncooperative, since it would only further your misguided suspicions. I have personally signed the archival inquest, after all, so that the entirety of past me's hypothetical insight will be at your disposal.
While this was true, it would likely take a while until the archive's number of independent supervisory bodies, as well as the House, had signed up on said inquest. knowledge of the future was a dangerous thing, and Earthsea's government institutions were designed with the explicit purpose of handling it responsibly, even when it was the very source of such knowledge asking. Unsteadily, the woman lit another smoke, as though this were the only fuel by which she could sustain the discussion.
To be completely honest, I find it curious that you would want to pursue this case in the first place. Would you risk the continuation of your species at the altar of justice?
Rose, I was raised in complete isolation by a lusus which was itself the last of its kind. I have no abstract attachments to the idea that future beings will be genetically similar to me. Frankly, I find it incredibly strange. But that doesn't mean that I'd ever be so foolish as to confuse law for morality.
She supposed an intuitive grasp on that distinction was easier to acquire on Alternia, where the two might as well have been opposites. When she wanted to be a legislacerator, there was never any pretense that her victims would be in any way wicked. Morality was a complicated, squishy afterthought. But the law was a game you could win. There were rules, there were clever ways of breaking the rules, and there was the thrill of the chase when it came to proving the latter. Justice was the great whetstone which kept Terezi Pyrope's cognitive implements sharp.
When I unravel this little tangle of lies and obfuscations, I can still decide to let the perpetrator walk free. That's the boring moral question, and it really doesn't matter. The game we're playing is about who broke the rules, and I have a far greater investment in that. Are you aware that Dave considers you to be the prime suspect?
Reclining a little, Rose exhaled a cloud of noxious chemicals into the air. She too enjoyed playing games after all, when the right one struck her fancy, even though her current disposition wasn't exactly sensitive to such strikes. The deliberation took only a moment, after which a smile broke through the oracle's tired features. It was the vaguely condescending sort that had always come easiest to her.
Strider and Egbert would be fools if they failed to suspect me. Correct fools, but fools nonetheless. I can all too readily relate to your frustration, Terezi, but where do you expect this OTO's line of inquiry to lead you?
The tone was off-puttingly similar to one Inspector Pyrope remembered from certain FLARP sessions.
Oh, the plank doesn't go much farther, matey. What will it be? A real fight or another step backwards?
The subsequent splash echoed through her mind.
Nowhere, it appears.
The undefeated champion of patronizing grins gladly returned to the favor as imagined crowds went wild with cataclysmic dismay. One does not challenge Terezi Pyrope to a smirk-off. She's simply the best there is.
I just wonder why that would be. I also wonder how you know what Egbert thinks.
Is it so difficult for you to imagine that he might have told me? What an interesting hypothesis to so casually exclude from consideration. For what it's worth, I know much more than I would like to on most everything.
Rose raised the corner of her mouth into a sardonic smile as though this were a joke, though the tone of her voice conveyed doubt about this insincerity. In the dim light of the study, she too seemed to be fading.
Oh, is that what your condition is about? If memory serves, visions didn't used to cause you such trouble.
A moment passed before the oracle responded, and when she did, her tone was much more careful than when she was merely being playfully coy and uncooperative.
The extent of discomfort is unprecedented and worrying, yes. A gradual swell over the past years. Though what you are seeing here isn't luminous clairvoyance. It would be more accurately described as the preceding build-up.
Pain inscribed every syllable dripping from Rosa's lips.
Imagine a planetary collision. Everything is shrouded in abysmal black as a foreign body obscures the sun. Darker and darker and darker still, snuffing all light from a hostile firmament in its incessant approach of insurmountable inertia. Until impact, when everything explodes into radiant, searing plasma. Neither stage is particularly pleasant.
She exhaled sharply.
I am afraid I have exhausted what little energy was at my disposal tonight, Miss Pyrep. Adieu.
Chapter 8. Missing the forest, missing the trees. Content warning. Needles. Viewpoint. Kanaya. Have you tried not shining that directly into my eyes?
No, I suppose I haven't. Mostly on account of that being a very silly and impossible thing to attempt. My glow is omnidirectional, as you have surely noticed, as well as necessary to illuminate the environment, which you yourself have pointed out. So, if I may propose a more sane directive towards the same end, have you considered not looking directly at me, but rather at the proximal surroundings? Roxy is unlikely to be hiding in my dress after all, and I hear human culture frowns upon the practice of staring into flashlights, relegating such behavior to unsupervised wrigglers. Intuition suggests that this might still be true for people wearing needlessly tenebrific eyewear during night time. The prince takes a short break to stew in targetless frustration as he hovers along. You hadn't seen much of each other since the sudden, violent, and largely unexplained dissolution of Rose's book club, which you refuse to call by its official name, and you cannot claim to be altogether dejected about this state of affairs. Your ecto-father-in-law is dispositionally intense, politically opportunistic, and philosophically a ruinous influence. I'm sorry, the outburst was uncalled for, I'll cop to that. But can you honestly blame me? Someone killed Jane, Roxy is mysteriously missing, and half of these chuckle fucks aren't even trying to figure out what's up with that. If you perceive me to be part of the problem, then why are you apologizing? Despite extensive familiarity with the human delivery style bafflingly like into deceased frying receptacles, you sounded surprisingly sincere there.
Nah, this is different. You make sense. Jane had a vision for this place, you had yours, they're conflicted and you're not even gonna pretend like her passing wasn't a boon for you. I kinda respect the shit out of that, actually. What's even the point of being a god if you aren't gonna optimize reality in accordance with your moral framework? That's the literal job description. Big disagree on specifics, especially when they involve the death of my friends, but I'd be a hypocrite to knock the hustle. Wow, you sure hate thinking of it that way. What situation does he perceive to be taking place here? Two enemy generals exchanging compliments of skill before their climactic battle, as though the nature of said skill lay not in harming each other's people. Oh god, that's it, isn't it? You know how obsessed historical records are with this trope, but you have never seen someone engaging in it earnestly, outside of exceptionally childish vicissitudes. But as much as I love my bro, he doesn't have that. Dave's not trying to build whatever his particular flavor of utopia is. What's keeping him from going back in time to see who did this are the irrational worries of his hysterical boyfriend.
Hysterical?
There's no way he actually thinks he's gonna die, right? Is he venting at you? And Pyrop is just insane. When I stole Jane's corpse...
You stole the body.
Yeah, you need those for autopsies. Worry seems not entirely misplaced. You've known people like Dirk. They were more common on Alternia than on Earth, this strange planet which had neither moral allegiance nor auspisticism to stop itself from exploding along the fissures of every single interaction, but they existed here too. Individuals who had outsourced all of their inhibitions, all of their doubts. People who never slowed down, never hesitated, never asked permission, because they knew, or at least hoped, that there would be a hand on their shoulder when they went too far, that they would be stopped even when their own brakes weren't working, that they would be aimed in the direction of something worthwhile by people who could actually be trusted with these things. Rose too had carried hints of this mindset at points, but only hints. Something in your stomach constricts like a serpent suffocating an unwelcome thought. It was careless, negligent, this pathological eagerness to trust everyone more than yourself, to trust others to notice when you start going too far and steal bodies, for instance, to trust the world to rein in your excesses. Sometimes the world isn't looking. Sometimes you've burned a bridge before anyone's caught up with you, and sometimes the wall is already too close. All of this reads clearly from his absence of facial expression, and you hope to God that the hydraulic fluid hasn't yet boiled off entirely amidst the fire of Dirk Strider's soul. Maybe there was still some vestigial functionality in his long-neglected built-in brakes.
Of course, cadaver theft is an activity carried out by only the most hinged and stable of individuals in my experience.
Look, it's not like I had a choice. But when I told her about the poison, she just grinned at me like a lunatic and told me that she already knew. She faked a fucking autopsy report just to mess with our heads to see how we would react. Playing baby's first amateur fucking mind game in a situation like this one. Hard to imagine anything more unprofessional.
Yes, I wonder. The underlying thought process sounds entirely dissimilar from that of a person who brings up hypothetical poisons in offhand remarks to their suspects.
Worth a try. The two of you share a look filled with mutual distrust, but not exactly antagonism.
So, what do you intend to do with this information, assuming that it does indeed possess a truth attribute of the non-imaginary variety?
Nothing. He lies. It's out of my hands now. Dirk gives the non-committal and entirely unconvincing shrug of someone who had learned one lesson over and over again, that the hands of strangers were far less capable than his own, and that entrusting them with things that mattered did not tend to be a wise decision. Unfortunately, you'd be a hypocrite to knock the hustle, as it were. Viewpoint. Rose. Azor bleeds like an oil slick into the pages of our foreword, 14 stone pillars rotting up on a hill, surrounding a fallen comrade as the clock strikes wrong again. You are incoherent cosmic screaming. A blade binds the loose ends of eternity. Summer blinds the united beginnings of now. No. A letter with instructions where not to look. Burn before reading. No. Let me start the story somewhere in the middle. No.
Are you all right, darling?
A voice barely perceived and not remotely comprehended. Whoever you are, you want this to stop. Disintegrating strands of vestigial you-ness try desperately to reorient their lack of antenna in a perception space with entirely too many directions and entirely too much signal. You are coherent cosmic screaming. Oh god, that's worse somehow. You cry out into the space where obtuse visual metaphor dries its fictitious laundry. Consciousness ladles itself from a well-used pot into the wrong receptacle. Turn the imaginary dial a little farther to somehow escape the pain. You are Tarwin Shurdlu, head archivist of the Prophecy Wing, and you are perfectly calm. You are always perfectly calm. You manage to be perfectly calm because you have a little slip of paper telling you exactly what to do. Mostly, your job. Reading through possible revelations from all over the planet, cross-referencing them with other predictions, assigning probabilities, noticing patterns. That's what you're currently doing. The slip of paper also tells you other things, like that you suffer from complete anterograde amnesia due to a head injury 3 years ago. You are incapable of forming new declarative memories, while your procedural memory has remained intact. You are well advised to take notes on everything, which you do reflexively, since your procedural memory has, as previously stated, remained intact. While there's no way to know for sure whether this condition got you the vaunted job, it synergizes well with your general neurotic competence in a way that makes you ideal for handling the most confidential information out there. You take pride in that. The you from the note writes that he felt the same, and why wouldn't he? Your division is irrefutably the most prestigious, while nonetheless comprising no more than a small adjunct to the sprawling organism of the Central Archives. If one had to explain them to the miraculously unaware, the archivists were collectors and guardians of all the knowledge this world possessed, carrying out censuses, compiling almanacs, keeping records. This monstrous quantity of data, even the parts that required clearance, was however benign in comparison to what lurked in the Prophecy Wing's vault, since it related to events which had already taken place, and was thus, in a way, already out there. According to the notes, your colleagues have reminded you 3 times today that you indeed deal in the good shit. A familiar scream erupts from behind the door to your office before finding its sudden death. It wouldn't even need to be familiar for you to know who it is amidst the extremely limited selection of people allowed to come here. Miss Mariam Lalonde, how about... Oh, I see. At first glance, it looks as though Kanaya Mariam Lalonde were carrying her catatonic wife draped halfway over her shoulder, but on a closer inspection you can see that this isn't the case. She floats all on her own, albeit unintentionally, and the rainbow drinker merely guides her along gently and makes sure she doesn't drift off. A soft glow radiates from Rose's body, but it's nothing in comparison to her eyes. Each a raging supernova, bathing your office in its cataclysmic light cone. Amidst the shower of stray photons, you grow overwhelmed with the idea that you might not really be a Tywin Shroudlew. The room grows fuzzy before it refocuses to a different angle.
I came as quickly as I could.
You remind yourself that this has never caused lasting damage. Remind yourself that she won't remember it, not really at least. No use. Your ThinkPan just isn't designed to hear your wife scream and be remotely okay with that. Its contents run through all the ways in which you already know that you can't help, stacking ill-formed thoughts together to avoid drowning in primal panic. In one of those celebrity magazines that dentists enjoy paneling their gratuitous holding chambers with, there was an article once. Surely they contain articles rather frequently, but it's the only one you have ever read. It told of a myth, urban perhaps in nature, that one would be driven insane if one looked into Rose's eyes while she had visions. Possibly because you'd see your own death, but the passage wasn't quite clear on such fictional details. This was when she was still in control, of course, making a show of it, before you started keeping the whole affair hush-hush. Whatever the specific context of the story's origin might have been, nowadays you believe it. Fairy tales are easy to believe when they're grim enough. Looking at the way raw pain distorts her scrunched-up features, being unable to do anything to stop it cannot help but drive you insane. The corner of your eye catches on a blurred emotion. If statues could run, they'd do it like a Tywin, seemingly without moving non-existent muscles. The middle-aged cerulean blood with the long greying dreadlocks has returned from the other side of the office carrying a syringe, which she plunges into your wife's arm without hesitation. The serum which will wipe her memory of this morning. You can feel Rose relax a little beneath your palm, slightly, painfully slightly, so very far from enough. His other hand is holding yours, you notice. It doesn't help, but you appreciate the gesture. I'm so very sorry, but you will have to wait outside. You know the rules. You've done this before. You gently wipe an emerald tear from the corner of your eye as you give Rose's arm a parting squeeze. She looks back at you. The faded youth has a sinking feeling that it might not belong here either. Screaming. Your name is Rose Lalonde, and you are staring into the eyes of Kanaya Mariam, staring into the eyes of Rose Lalonde, staring into the eyes of eternity. White, searing light floods your consciousness to burn away the pain along with everything else, and behind the unendurable magnesium flame you can make out the symbols that make up everything. You are the narrative reading itself, 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 reading its...
You... I remember suddenly understanding everything. Oh my, what a mess. Did we twist it to a point of such disrepair? Or were the beds reality made for us, be they questly in nature or otherwise, already shambolic wrecks which we merely failed to tidy? I suppose in this state I could simply check which side the cosmic scales favour. Well, since it is just us here, and since I will soon return to some quixotic approximation of humanity either way, would you terribly mind if I confessed something? Occupy the psychoanalytical couch for a change and dig through the wretched folds of my own subconscious, hoping to unearth relics I have not seen before, only for you to throw the alleged discovery back in my face as obvious psychosexual fallout of the vacuum cleaner I once gave to my mother in a transparent act of incestuous solicitation. I mean, vacuum, really. Must the gaping chasm of desperate emotional lack be so semiotically obvious? Must it accommodate her aspect quite so willingly? I will take your metaphysical inability to answer as a yes. Some part of me, ironically the part which usually denies it most fervently, thinks that I really could get used to this. Of course, you can't fully appreciate what this means, but trust me, it is a lot. Imagine the hypothetical experience you would dub enlightenment, the apotheotic culmination of metacosmic insight, and then picture that apogee as a single, unremarkable atom within the universe I am experiencing. If it weren't for Kanaya out there in the hallway, all of these Kanayas in all of these hallways, thinking and feeling things I am too cowardly to read in detail, this existence would be utterly intoxicating. That's probably why I don't allow myself to have it. Oh God, he would have a field day with that. I know everything, and yet still I resort to probably with regards to my own motives. Father, if some version of you ever stumbles upon this embarrassingly candid introspection, please try not to feel too self-satisfied. I know it will be difficult, but do me the favour.
We may begin. Miss Lalonde Mariam, please, tell me what you see.
It's almost a shame that it won't matter what I tell him. Humorous, but a shame nonetheless. A Tarwin wouldn't look much like a professional if it weren't for the expression he wears, and I do wonder whether it might crack if I alerted him to the underlying futility of his task. I suppose I am telling him, though not quite so plainly. Azor bleeds like an oil slick into the pages of our foreword. A blade binds the loose ends of eternity. Summer blinds the united beginnings of now. A letter with instructions where not to look. Burn before reading.
Chapter 9. Old Friends. Content warning. Severe injury. Blood. Viewpoint. None. Jake looked lost amidst the vast interrogation room, his broad physique scrunched up and misplaced as he sat there on a dinky wooden chair, gaze bouncing around like an uncertain ping-pong ball. An occasional reshaping of the mustache, a nervous stroke of the goatee just to keep restless fingers occupied. His usual effortless smile, too, seemed to fail in the pursuit of finding a comfortable shape. When the page finally answered, there were tears in his eyes.
Good gravy, I understand that you are doing what you are invited here for, Miss Pyrope, and you really are doing a bang-up job of it too, if I do say so myself. But please understand that Janie is still a very sore subject on my end.
He extracted a handkerchief from the breast pocket of his coat and dabbed at the corner of his eyes. The one elegant gesture conflicted horribly with the rest of the man's pathetic sobbing.
Golly, you must have heard all sorts of things about our relationship, much of it true as well, I shudder to admit. After all, you would be hard-pressed to find amongst my friends some wily fabulist who would pollute your earnest inquiry with fictitious gobbledygook. No, I fear we were never as picture-book mint as Jane would have liked us to be. Everything always had to be primo, you see, and time again I was a frightful disappointment on that front. Only in babbling my cater-trap off to the good Miss Caius did I realise what a prickly jumble of dysfunction we had manoeuvred ourselves into. Voluntary self-reflection was never a forte of me, after all, despite a lifetime of Strider's spirited tongue-lashings on the subject.
Miss Caius.
Oh, Vera Caius, my therapist, and a truly swell shrink she is too, flashes the old billboard double thumbs up.
Jake did this while still visibly crying.
And give her a call if you ever need your pointy noggin cleared of all that foul gear-clogging gunk.
The investigator blinked in confusion a few times, but Jake's expression did not seem to budge.
Jake English, are you pulling my front?
Why, I wouldn't dare attempt such a thing, and that's not even mentioning how unfit for jest this particular topic would be. Mental health is a serious matter, Miss Pyrope, and one which I have been terribly neglectful of in between my adventures, interpersonal and otherwise. What could possibly make you think that I would be jovial here, good chum?
This is not my first time around the block of human cultural illusion, and I was under the distinct impression that therapists weren't a real thing. A comforting Wriggler fantasy like Vernal Oviparous Hop Beast or the Spirit of Democracy, and that seeking to get therapy was just a tongue-in-cheek deflection tactic to acknowledge how deeply fucked up you are mentally without any intention of doing something about that fact. The apparently much lighter talk about mental health had allowed Jake to calm down somewhat. His eyes still glistened, but he looked more composed now than when he entered. His awful, forced smile, which had been desperately maintained all throughout the crying, slowly dropped as he contemplated this idea, bushy brow furrowing, hands finding each other in a pensive clasp. The absolute travesty of his earlier expression gave way step by step to a serious one, filled with soft worry and regret.
I suppose it's understandable how one would come to that conclusion talking to some of these magnificent codgers. Oh, consarn it, I probably made that very same mistake for far too long.
Noted, but newly acquired belief in the existence of therapy isn't a satisfying response to my assertion, Jake. If so many of the rumors about your relationship are true, then you would have had both motive and opportunity for that most wretched of deeds. Terezi grinned again, as tentatively as her facial musculature allowed for, which is to say broadly, but not quite as broadly as on the last try, hoping that her interlocutor wouldn't break into tears this time around.
Hardly. Miss Pyrope, I understand that cultural differences might be leading us astray here, but a few degrading wrinkles in the particulars of a relationship are far from grounds for murder. Of course, the SO is a prime suspect for any detective worth their salt, but I still ought protest these charges. Why, I was tight as a boiled owl when I came in to find Janie. I couldn't have hurt a fly in any way that wasn't falling on it, even if I wanted to, which I surely did not.
Came in?
To the foyer, old gal, the foyer, from our bedroom just above that dread crescent. Next you'll accuse me of tot hunting to the wee hours like the hanky-panky beau that gossip brags would make me out to be. Well, for all our premarital flaws, disloyalty was never one of them.
Slowly but surely, Terezi was getting the distinct impression that she wasn't getting anywhere with this man.
I just knelt next to her, a collapsed heap of booze and sorrows as anyone would be, waiting for her to rise, and waiting. Incorrigible palooka that I am, I died my fair share of times on expeditions, you know. Stray bullets, hypothermia, or just a great darned helping of good old terrestrial gravity. Death's a scare like no other, even when it isn't terminal, let me tell you. That's why most folks wipe it from their marble in a jiffy after biting the big one. No point racking up unnecessary trauma. So, only a right fiend would have let a delicate lady like Jane lie there unattended, but the hour passed. 9:30 turned to 10, turned to 10:30, and Jane...
There was a sudden commotion outside. Shouting, gunfire, the cacophony of various expensive pieces of furniture breaking after possibly being thrown. Jake and the investigator exchanged a perplexed look of the sort which might be denoted visually by mouths impossibly twisting into question marks. Brief silence preceded a familiar sound midway between a scream and a hiss, before pandemonium erupted again with renewed fervour. Disconcertingly, it also seemed to be coming closer. 5 more minutes of the intensifying auditory mayhem later, the entrance to the interrogation room finally flew open. The woman responsible was littered with bullets and panting profusely. While parts of her body, including hands and mouth, dripped blood which wasn't her own, most of the fluid drenching her clothes and hair definitely was. More blood than should ever be outside a living person's circulation at any given time, running down her torso and legs and swirling into growing puddles upon the cold marble floor. The leg she had used to kick the door open betrayed a slight tremble she sought to hide, and her right arm hung limp to her side, as though it were broken in too many places to even bother keeping up appearances. Theatrically, the intruder spat out some more colourful liquid along with the tooth. Hey, losers! There is sadly no symbol in any language dreamt up by Paradox Space which would resemble the expressions Terezi and Jake had acquired. They blended shock, horror, and concern without ever feeling to look entirely stupid in addition to those. Only one sound echoed in the unnecessarily large room, and it was the rhythmic drip of cerulean blood onto stone. Surely Vriska would have been allowed to pass had she simply told the guards who they were speaking to, but such wasn't the thief's style. She had seen a bunch of dudes with weapons standing in her way, talking like they thought they were hot shit, and in Circuit Land, this wasn't a crime which could be forgiven.
Vriska! Gulp.
Hate to interrupt whatever unimportant business you are discussing, but I found your dumb murder weapon. No need to thank me. It's what I do.
Her voice was unsteady towards the end, and she swayed back and forth from blood loss, but Vriska Circuit stayed upright. Her unbroken, unprosthetic, unsploded arm was wound around an object neither of them had noticed earlier in their shock. Its dark, ancient wood almost blended into the door frame, though in a few small patches, where it hadn't yet completely peeled off, one could still make out the green paint which had once coated the instrument. The grandfather clock's dial was split in twain, cut down the middle by its singular ornate hand, a piece of warped metal so black that it seemed to draw reality inwards, shredding it and refashioning it into something else entirely, darker than any physical material had any right to be. One side of the face was a brilliant gold, the other a rich purple, hues vying for microns of conceptual ground, one unsuspecting soul at a time, locked in a fierce battle for narrative dominance in exactly as far as inanimate colours were capable of. The god-tier clock emanated an uncanny silence that made the hairs on Jake English's neck stand on end. Vriska grinned in the shit-eating way that only people who have just lost some teeth can, and slumped a little lower.
Viewpoint. Dave. Your gait is hesitant as you pace through the wet grass of the Consort Kingdom, hands dug deep in the pockets of a maroon hoodie. A week has passed since that night at the burning storage facility. A week has passed and left its days buried in the ember of your mind. Not hearing from Egbert for up to a month wasn't unheard of, but given the circumstances, radio silence was still twisting your gut into the sorts of fancy knots that kids who aren't trained by the ranged urban ninja learn during summer camp. Knots seem lit. You have literally no excuse to still not know dick about knots. You're 21, it's starting to get embarrassing. Then, yesterday, there was finally a message. It forced you to cancel your plans of joining Karkat to meet Solix, being shown off like a goddamn trophy husband or whatever his designs were, but that wasn't exactly worth hesitation. Karkat understood. He was furious about how last minute it was, of course, furious about June's lack of communication, furious about not being invited, but only in the way in which your boyfriend is always furious about these sorts of things, an anger which doesn't really even hide the deep caring beneath, but rather expresses it in the only way he's ever known. So, here you are. You're the first person June agreed to talk to, which you guess is flattering and speaks to your years of valuable friendship, though it would admittedly be even more flattering if she hadn't come out to your non-binary mom months ago. You offered to just call Roxy your parent, or drop the weird references to circular ectolineage altogether a number of times, but they insisted on sticking with mom, which you respect the hell out of. Obviously mom isn't a gendered term, you think. Anyone can be a mom, especially Roxy. Is the coming out to Roxy because of gender bullshit? Surely you're gay enough for her not to worry about how you might react, right? Have you ever made a transphobic joke? Okay, scratch that, of course you have. You also made homophobic jokes and sexist jokes, and, wow, you sucked. You sucked real bad. You should probably apologize to everyone you have ever known for every word past you has ever typed. Hey, sorry guys, I was a repressed teen in literally Texas, literally 2009, and that basically explains everything without excusing any of it. But current you? Current you is the bomb. Current you is an entirely different genre of shithead. Current you might just be the gayest of all your friends. Rose married an imminently presentable high-femme vampire, after all, which, if you look it up on the chart, is kiddie pool levels of homosexuality. And Jade... well, okay, Jade is difficult to classify, but you're into fucking Karkat, by which you don't mean fucking Karkat, but fucking Karkat. Well, also fucking Karkat. The point is, Karkat. That's gotta give you, this person couldn't possibly be weirdly bigoted about anything, points.
Not that you'd want to be, woke king that you are. Please let June not be worried about current you. Only narrowly do you avoid kicking a small turtle who walks past you in the face, just delivering a family-sized helping of strider foot squarely into their yellow cranium. But the consort does not seem to understand what just happened, and tips their beret in greeting. A certain quality of their gaze alerts you to the fact that this reptile does not know, or at least could not give less of a solitary fuck about who you are. It makes sense why someone would want to live here, the incessant knacking aside. Rural consortia was the sort of place where you could just be some guy, or some gal in her case. Demographics were mixed to the point of indistinction in the big cities of all kingdoms, of course, but here on the countryside, a human was an aberration, an entirely unremarkable aberration. The only question anyone asks themselves when they see you here is the ancient question. The only question which ever mattered to anyone. The ultimate riddle of insane bullshit brainless amphibians might ask themselves. Who's this douchebag? And you can nod, shades a twinkle with the implicit recognition of how much nuance there would be bursting from the seams of any coherent answer. Nuance which can only be found in a decade of obtuse, semi-ironic blog posts, and perhaps not even there.
Dave, are you okay?
Apparently, you have been pacing in circles for a while, getting some steps in, which would be a more convincing excuse if you actually owned a step counter. June is sitting high up on a steel beam dangling from a tower crane. As you float up to join her, a number of alterations to your friend's appearance become obvious. The skirt is one thing, as is the blue paint on her nails, but what strikes you most is how purposeful her long-ish hair suddenly looks, casually swept to the side with a slight wave adorning the foremost strand. She must have worn it this way in private for a while now. Oh, totally. Got distracted by a turtle because what the fuck else is even new. Entirely normal and expected pre-meetup behavior. Speaking of things and their newness attributes, you. Looking cute as shit in an entirely platonic way, which I'm unambiguously on board with, in case there was ever any doubt about that. She laughs, sort of awkwardly trying to keep her voice from slipping, but definitely sincere. It's been a while since you really heard her laugh like that, and the sound incinerates a number of your concerns immediately. June crosses her legs slowly before she replies.
That's what you were worried about?
I mean, yeah.
I didn't think you guys were gonna oust me, you dingus. At least, not seriously. Mostly, I think I was anxious about having to explain myself, because I can't really. I still can't beyond, hi, I'm June, I'm me, finally. So, for a while I just stalled like an idiot, waiting to figure out the entirety of gender and, I don't know, mastering femininity? Like, that's a thing you can do? But the more I waited for everything to fully make sense, the more the pile of things I felt like I'd have to explain just grew and grew, making it even more of an insurmountable task, when the truth is that I just didn't have to do that. At all. I didn't even tell Roxy, they just sort of knew. And I was so unprepared for that I just burst on the spot and told them everything. Not just the gender stuff, everything. My depression, my worries, all the obvious bits and the not obvious bits as well. Things I never thought I'd be able to say to anyone. Maybe I should be mad at them? Like, they spilled my secret, but honestly, I'm sort of happy about that. Who knows for how long I might have drifted along microdosing gender euphoria, waiting for a confidence that isn't guaranteed to come, so... Hi, I'm June. I'm me finally.
Then we're cool.
Duh, why wouldn't we be cool? Don't start walking on eggshells around me now, Strider. We both know you can't do that to save your life.
Just checking. So, what's next? You're gonna change your quirk to reflect that personal breakthrough?
Don't laugh, but I have considered that actually. Maybe substitute B's for sixes? 6, like June, 6th month of the year. Beginning of summer. Come on, Dave, keep up.
No, I got that. Just saying we've had pretty mixed experiences with people who replace their B's with shit. And by mixed I mean uniformly either terrible or at least volatile. Don't get me wrong, I'll fully support your ominous typographical decisions. I'm just pointing it out. June, you're not saying anything. Please back me up here. I heard how long that pause was earlier.
Okay, geez, I'm not gonna do the 6th thing. That's not what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, what did you want to talk about? I'm all ears. Nothing but auditory orifices. An unnatural heap of body horror tuned in and ready to be supportive as all fuck.
Stop. What? I appreciate you trying to be here for me, but why are you overemphasizing it like that? It's really weird, Dave. Do I have to start asking whether we're cool?
Partially some recent insights into the crimes of past me. Don't ever tell Kaka to said that. Also, I'm probably trying to, earn the fact there was someone to this personal coming out such before Jade and Rose did. I get Rose, obviously, but Jade? There's the laugh again.
Honestly, I just don't think I can handle her calling me her sister yet. More with microdosing gender euphoria. I don't think I've reached the tolerance required to not immediately combust in that setting. Look at me, I'm physically vibrating, Dave. I know this is hard to explain, but...
No, I get it. I remember spilling gay shit to Dirk. Gushing, really. This might be difficult to believe given my usual cool silent type style of conversation, but I ensnared that fuck in a torrent of self-indulgent monologues so continuous it might as well have been breadsticks. Coming out to family is different. It just is. Even when it's tenuous as fuck ecto-family, which basically shouldn't matter at all, but does so anyway because fuck you, that's how we're programmed. Inbuilt loud button for emotional bullshit, hard mode for the discerning player call shit, slap some extra locks in that closet so you can stumble out of it ass backwards at figurative Thanksgiving like a piece of fucking garbage.
Yeah, kind of exactly like that. Dave, have you ever felt like the universe completely validated you about something?
You cock an eyebrow.
Okay, let me start over. There are 64 to the 8 capture codes total, across all sessions of the game. Around 99.9% of those are useless, or at least useless to us. Maybe there's an alien culture out there for which rocket violin pods are super important, but that's dumb. You get what I mean. It's set up in a way that any random string of letters will probably give you something stupid. You have to know what you're looking for. Mugladle. Mugladle gets you cyproteron acetate, anti-androgen. It's gal pills.
Mugladle.
Don't worry about that. The point is that it was there. For me. Out of the infinite noise of things which could occupy those limited slots, that was one of them. This isn't leading anywhere, it's just a fact. It's a thing that's true about reality. HRT was one of the things we were cosmically meant to have, and I still occasionally burst into tears thinking about that.
Fuck.
You tell me.
Okay, completely unrelated to that bombshell revelation, there is a thing I needed to ask you, now that I know we're chill.
Okay, that doesn't sound weirdly ominous at all.
No, weirdly ominous is Rose territory. I just asked the hard question. Investigative journalism type shit. Mr. President, why are you eating babies, and what do they taste like? Or in this case, you look over the rim of your shades to make clear how serious you're being. How long's Terezi really been here for? Notes. Behind the searing magnesium light, you can make out the symbols that make up everything. And maybe, if you squint at the space between lines, you can see a curly-haired figure sitting at a keyboard. They're talking to you. Hi, I'm Oro, and I write Daikon. Don't worry, there won't be any author insert shenanigans in this story. I just didn't know how to start this. Did I say hi yet? Hi. Thank you so much for reading. Vriska's arrival and Dave asking the question jointly mark the end of what I consider to be Act 1 of this story. All the cards have finally been dealt, and it's time to start playing with them. I think of this story as my personal epilogue. The formatting probably makes that obvious. It's not a fix-it, I don't think the epilogues need to be fixed, but another path. One which speaks in more human, interpersonal terms. A simple murder instead of the collapse of canonicity. The cherub diet is unbecoming to the human digestive system. Neither meat nor candy in excess is good for these kids. That's the point. They need to repair things which they haven't realized are broken, and they need to rip open old scars so they can heal better this time around. Leading the lives that they have isn't something you fix in a few normal conversations though, in part because they just aren't the sort of people who have those willingly. It would take years of healing for all of them under normal circumstances, and while that would be a better universe to inhabit, the little dirk on my shoulder tells me that's not a compelling story. Believe it or not, I don't hate Jane. If this were the perfect path, the unambiguous, good end, roll credits, she wouldn't be dead. There would have been another way of preventing a fascist dystopia. Jane isn't irredeemable, not even close. She's a kid who got put in charge of a planet. Of course she'd be scared of massive, unfamiliar changes which might fuck up everything for everyone. You don't want to be the god responsible for a disaster. Daikon Jane's politics were bad, but they didn't come from a place of malice. I honestly think of her as a blood sacrifice. An inciting incident to get these kids to come to conclusions they need to come to, and forge the bonds they need to forge, in a dramatically satisfying way. It's less healthy and more painful than the everyone goes to therapy route, but it's quicker. Jane was literally slain for meat. The fact that I'm using black magic at all means that this isn't the best timeline. Since Daikon isn't about notional fading like the epilogues, it would be weird to start it with an absurdly long period of interpersonal stasis. It makes sense for a depressed June to lock herself up in a room doing nothing for years, but it doesn't make sense for anyone else in a universe which isn't losing saturation. So I set a lot of epilogue events earlier. Jane Jake, Jade Avecat, though a much healthier version of it, Roxy coming out as non-binary, etc. As well as placing a number of non-epilogue things in this time span which you will gradually learn about. I'm having a lot of fun writing the story and I'm overjoyed that people are appreciating it. It's been a long while since I wrote fanfic and I love being back. If you want to read some non-fanfic Homestuck writing I've done, I suggest my class-specting treatise, or, for original works, including my novella, just look at my website. Thank you so much for reading. See you next week in Act 2.